Go ahead and call the meeting to order. Thank you, everybody. We've got a pretty loaded agenda. It's on. Are we live on YouTube? Yep. Okay. We've got a pretty loaded agenda, so we're going to do our best to try to make sure that we get ourselves started here on time and stay on agenda and topic today. So first order of business, we'll go ahead and do a couple opening remarks, and the biggest ones that I've got, and then I'll turn it over to the vice chair here is, again, we do have a lot of information here today. We have a lot of information being poured into this committee, as well as what has been done recently with the Select Schools Commission. Thank you, Commissioner Tarter, for being here, Chairman Tarter for being here. Appreciate you. And then also see Representative Henderson here from Cheyenne. Thank you for making the trip. So a lot of work. So the biggest thing that I'm going to ask is comments stay on topic, and you know, the chairman may interrupt if we're going down rabbit holes that aren't on topic. We've got a lot of work to do over just a very short amount of time, and I want to try to get everybody out of here at a decent time tonight, so we're not traveling across the state and middle of the night tonight. So Mr. Vice Chairman, you got any words of wisdom for us?
Thank you. I'm not sure about that, Mr. Chairman, but just a couple of things. First, I want to recognize a couple of good senators at the back of the room, Senator DeCaria, Senator Wasserberger. My golly, good to see you guys again. Yes. Perfect. Thank you, Senator. Appreciate you lining us up and setting us up. And it's always good to see you. We have some newcomers to the Select Committee on School Facilities. And I just want to emphasize to everyone, as we wade into some of this stuff, not everybody's been around the block on this. So please do not hesitate to stop and ask for an explanation on what in the world is a Mercer study. Those kind of things are not out of bounds at all. So we have a lot of depth. In fact, the two senators that I just recognized both served many years on this committee. So we go back a long ways. We've worked long and hard on this, and look forward to the work ahead. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely. All right, with that, we need roll call.
Senator Brightman.
Here.
Senator Hicks. Senator McCune.
Here.
Senator Rothfuss. Representative Harshman. Representative Oakley. Representative Olson.
Here.
Representative Storer. Vice Chairman Landon.
Here.
Chairman Brown.
Here.
And Mr. Chairman, just for everybody's knowledge, the Wi-Fi is on that back wall. It's the NWCCD guest, and you just got to accept the terms. So anybody who needs to connect to that.
Thank you, Ashley. Right. Staff, anything else beyond that at this point, besides we move into the rest of the agenda? Do you guys have anything for us up front? Okay. All right. So next thing that we have on the agenda is rules and adoption of the rules for the Select Committee. This committee, ladies and gentlemen, has operated as basically just a it's all pretty simple stuff, to be honest with you, and how the information comes across. So absent objection, we'll operate underneath the traditional rules of the Select Committee, which is a majority vote of the entire body. So absent objection, we'll make that the situation.
Mr. Chairman,
Senator,
I do think it would be appropriate to vote on that motion if we're going to go down that road. I'm assuming that's what you're going to do, instead of just by acclamation adopt those.
certainly.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Representative Harshman.
Mr. Chairman, I'd make the motion that the rules of the committee are the standard rules.
Okay.
Second.
Moved and seconded by Olson. Any discussion?
Mr. Chairman, just to expedite the
Senator
proceedings,
Hicks.
you know, it's really up to the committee. It's this committee to decide which rules they want to adopt. standard rule is a majority of both, or of the majority of the committee to sponsor legislation. Many of the committees, and I shouldn't say many, but the other option is that it takes a majority of both bodies to sponsor legislation. Just for clarification. So what we're doing now is the proposed motion is to adopt a majority of the committee to sponsor legislation. Is that correct?
That is correct, Senator.
All right.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of adopting the standard rules, which is a majority vote of the entire committee, not a majority vote of each house. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no.
No.
Motion passes. All right. Next on the agenda here, we are going to move right in. We're actually 8 minutes ahead. Looky there, Mr. Vice Chairman. We're moving ahead. So we're going to start up directly with our K through 12 school facilities end of session summary with staff and Ms. Heitrick and Mr. Hoversland. Whenever you guys are ready.
Mr. Chairman, one other housekeeping item that you might want to discuss is absentee voting. I know a number of other committees have taken that up at the beginning, the first meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Heitrick. That is a good point. So we will go ahead and operate again underneath the pretty much standard rules that have been again happening since I've been in the legislature. And I think they go way back further than that, is ensuring that if you're going to leave an absentee vote, that absentee vote is going to be at basically the discretion of the chairman and vice chairman, and making sure that you have attended a majority of the discussion and that you know what you're voting on before that vote is left. So I haven't heard anything. I do see Senator Hicks has got his microphone on. Senator Hicks, do you have some discussion on this?
No, Mr. Chairman, I just want to make for sure and for the record that what we did was we adopted joint interim committee rule 17-1A.
Ms. Heitrick, do you have, and Senator Hicks, just because I don't have that 17-1A, I believe that's the House rules that you're referring to. Is that correct?
No, so it'd be under our joint interim committee rules, which is 17-1. Which says subject to subject B that this section, the standard rules for a joint interim committee attached as an appendix A to the joint rules of the House and the Senate shall be the rules of each joint interim committee of the legislature.
Correct. Yes, you're correct.
That's what we've adopted.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, I think the question, Senator, is with regard to joint rule 17-1B. And the House and the Senate adopted different positions. And so those are the two positions that you outlined eloquently a few moments ago.
Chairman, since this is brought up again, just a couple more comments on that. Since this committee is divided 5 and 5, the chairman and the vice chairman will always know where the votes came from. And it will be taken informally into consideration. For example, if we've got 4 senators who don't like a measure, it'll start in the House. We're not going to waste our time in a chamber that doesn't support something. So there's plenty of awareness on this front, just for the expedition of today's agenda and moving on to the interim. You know, I think the vote was a good one. We'll just proceed as normal.
Mr. Chairman, I agree. Any further discussion, rules and or absentee voting? Yes, Senator Beitman.
Just to clarify on where we're at on absentee voting, are we leaving it up to the chairman's discretion as to whether or not he's going to accept an absentee vote, or is our vote, whether we we're able to hear most of the discussion or not? If it's a bill draft that we've read and we're comfortable with it, we leave a proxy, unless substantially amended or something like that. Would that suffice? Because if the bill hadn't changed, your vote's still your vote. Would that be taken into consideration?
Yeah, so it will be at the discretion of the chairman, the 2 chairmen, but ultimately what it boils down to is the adoption of legislative procedure that was adopted during last session does go into this very heavily, and it does explain very, very detailed that it's the discussion, not necessarily the day of. So, we may have discussion today and then vote on the next meeting. And if you're not here next meeting, there may be a small amount of discussion on that. You would certainly be able to leave that proxy vote, and it would be up to the chairman, or absentee, I'm sorry. You would be able to leave that absentee vote. It would be up to the chairman as to whether or not, if there was substantial changes made, whether or not that was the same indication that you were looking for. So I don't anticipate, again, this committee has not seen very many issues with that as it's rolled through. So I don't anticipate it being an issue as we're moving through at this time either. So, okay. With that,
Mr. Chairman,
yes,
just one other
Senator.
question regarding remote participation. It's come up with a number of the committees. What's the policy, or what are we going to do as far as the chairman's prerogative as far as participation remotely?
So are you talking for members of the committee, or are you?
Committee members.
Committee members, it's the expectation of the chairman that you participate as much as possible being here. But again, that's also lined out in the legislative procedures that were adopted by both chambers last year. So if you cannot make it, just please let the chairman know. But it's the expectation of both chairmen that you're able to make it to as many meetings as you can. There's only 3 meetings of this. And I do appreciate everybody being here yesterday for the tours and everything along those lines. So, these are not 2 full day meetings. Generally, it's 1 full day meeting with some tours. So not asking for a ton of time, and would appreciate you showing up.
Yeah, so thank you, Mr. Chairman, because I do think the rules allow for at the discretion of the chairman of the committee for participating remotely. And I just wanted to make sure that, as I understood you correctly, that if for some reason some member can't make it, but they could participate remotely, they would be allowed to do so in their official capacity.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you.
Yep. All right, we're going to go ahead and move on. We are 1 minute ahead still. So Ms. Heitrek, please.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Tanya Heitrich, I'm the Operations Administrator with the Legislative Service Office. In your packet, and as the first agenda item, the substantive agenda item is the K-12 school facilities end of session summary. There were a number of bills that were sponsored by this committee last year, and just sort of as a educational effort, Chairman Brown asked our staff to put together a memo outlining bills that had touched on school facilities in the 2023 session. The first bill is Chapter 15 that was sponsored by the Select Committee, and this bill authorizes and confirms the ability of the legislature to appropriate funds for design and construction in a single sum. Historically, the committee has done that on occasion. However, there was some question about whether statutorily that was authorized. I would note this does not change the budget practice for the commission and the department. They're still required to adhere to a line item, putting in the construction and the planning and the budget, or the design, and can't deviate between line items in the budget without authority of the governor, subject to some statutory provisions that do allow, I think, up to 10%. Moving on to Chapter 83, also a bill sponsored by the Select Committee. This eliminates the commission's requirement to prepare a consolidated remediation schedule. Recall, you all saw rules last year that embedded a consolidated remediation schedule. In response to that, this committee felt it was important to eliminate the consolidated remediation schedule. And so as a result of that, it will be business as usual. You'll receive a condition needs index as well as a capacity index, and making decisions regarding what projects will be funded in the future. Chapter 175, this bill came through the Joint Appropriations Committee. Senator Hicks was involved in those discussions. It eliminates the school major maintenance sub-account within the SIPA, the Strategic Investments and Projects account, and the school lands mineral royalties account, as well as the school capital construction account, effective July 1st of 2024. Practically what this means is that the state will deal with a single checkbook for both the operational and the capital construction expenses related to K-12 public education. The funds that would have been deposited in those three accounts that I noted will now be deposited in the Public School Foundation Program account. An additional change that was made in that bill clarifies that for fiscal year 23 and 24, the transfer from the strategic investment and projects account to the school major maintenance sub-account will occur prior to the transfer of funds to the Wyoming State Penitentiary Capital Construction account. There was some discussion among LSO staff about what the priority would be in the event that both of those transfers could not occur due to revenue shortage. Recall you all had a bill, House Bill 25 last year that you sponsored that did the same thing. I did some other things as well, but that bill died. And then the next bill is Chapter 166. This was brought primarily sponsored by Senator Rothfuss, and it was effective upon signature, which was March 9th of this year. And it modifies the requirements associated with leasing, requiring that leases separately identify funds for major maintenance. Some practices by districts where charter schools and specifics weren't receiving the major maintenance funds to maintain their buildings. And then it also clarifies that charter schools are not required to pay rent for space is within a school district that the state construction department deems as adequate and available. Lastly, I would note that there were two additional bills, Senate File 44 and Senate File 45. Senate File 44 dealt with major maintenance, then Senate File 45 dealt with the building acquisition related to Natrona County. Both of those were sponsored by this committee in the 2023 session, but didn't pass. They weren't considered for introduction. The last item that I'll note is the supplemental budget for school capital construction that occurred through Section 313 of the budget bill. And it provided approximately 120.3 million for additional K-12 construction. That amount is allocated, 20.3 million was allocated for inflation costs for projects previously approved and appropriated funds. $5 million for professional consulting expertise. This generally is like most cost-effective remedy studies, or commonly referred to as Mercers. And then the last 95 million was for school building and facility construction and design. And on that note, I would note that expenditure of the 95 million does require completion of both the capacity and the condition needs indexes to be completed this year. It also requires that it's contained in a school district building and facility plan developed in accordance with statute, which is required every 2 years, that it is the most cost-effective remedy to deliver quality education services, and that it adheres to the statewide adequacy standards. In order to fully fund the prior and current appropriation or expenditures for the school capital construction account, a total of $327.1 million was transferred from the Public School Foundation Program account to the school capital construction account. And subject to your question, that completes the K-12 end of session summary.
Committee, any discussion on the K through 12 information that came out of this committee? Thank you, Tanya, for that. Any discussion on the bills that were passed and or sponsored and not passed? Seeing none.
So, Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Vice Chairman.
just as a point of information, my understanding, Tanya, is that with regard to facilities, we've got work going on the major maintenance front. That is an interim topic for our Joint Appropriations Committee, I believe. And I also understand that on the executive side of the House, that there's work going on by the SBC to look into major maintenance. Is that correct?
Sure, and that's my understanding as well, that Joint Appropriations Committee has taken up major maintenance, both in the context of K-12 education as well as statewide with the buildings owned by the state.
So, Mr. Chairman, I think as we go through the interim, if we have suggestions, I know the Joint Appropriations Committee is mostly where our information travels to anyway, but I do think that they will be looking at schools along with other state buildings. So just for the information to the committee.
Thank you, Tanya. Mr. Hoversland, anything further, as you're on the agenda as well, but I believe Tanya did a good job of covering everything. So I'm going to look to you and just make sure you're good. Okay. Again, no further questions here. We'll open this up for public comment. Is there any public comment on last year's legislation? All right, seeing none, we will move on. Looky there, we are moving through here. So we don't have any committee directives on this at this point, other than what the vice chairman was just mentioning, and we will work directly with staff on that as we move forward, that if there is something that comes up through discussions over the course of the next 3 meetings, we'll work hand in hand with the Joint Appropriations Committee. So that moves us into our next agenda item, which is charter schools and the review in the governing statutes. And then we'll go ahead and move over once we get past that. So Tanya, this is you as well.
And members of the committee, again, Tanya Heitrick, Legislative Service Office. In your packet, there's a memo dated June 12th, and the subject is K-12 public charter schools. The intent of that memo is to simply outline high level the governing statutes for our operation of charter schools. There's been significant interest in the last several years in charter schools. In 2021, there was a large bill sort of making sweeping changes, and then again in 2023. And recall that your interim topics include the study of the costs associated with new construction, major maintenance, and leasing expenses for existing charter schools. Charter schools are generally governed by a set of statutes. They begin at 21-3-301 through 314. And public charter schools are public schools, regardless of whether they're authorized by the SLIB, which was previously authorized to approve the operation of 3 charter schools in the state of Wyoming, or the new Wyoming Charter School Authorizing Board created in 2023. All charter schools are required to deliver the content and performance standards contained in statute and adopted by the State Board of Education. They're required to administer the statewide student assessment. Full-time teachers are required to be certified just as any other public school teacher, and they are subject to state and federal anti-discrimination laws. In 2021, as I mentioned, the legislature modified the statutes governing charter schools in a relatively substantial way, including authorizing the SLIB to approve the operation of up to 3 charter schools. In response to that charge, on September 14th of 2022, the SLIB approved the Office of State Lands and Investment and the Wyoming Department of Education to execute contracts with those 3 charter schools. I would encourage the committee to ask the Department of Education and the State Construction Department if you have questions regarding those 3 schools that were approved. There are 5 existing charter schools that were approved by school districts. Those are listed in a footnote of the memo. In 2023, again, extensive changes were made to the operation and approval for charter schools, and the SLIB was eliminated as an authorizing authority, and a board called the Wyoming Charter School Authorizing Board was created. This is comprised of 8 members, 3 appointed by the state superintendent, 3 appointed by the governor, the dean of the College of Education at the University of Wyoming, and the State Board of Education chair or his or her designee. I would note that this board is limited to either approving new schools to backfill the 3 that were approved by the SLIB in the event that one of those is not able to move forward or fails. And then 1 additional school for the period beginning July 1st of 2026 through July 1st of 2028. After that date, July 1st of 2028, there will be no limitation on the number of schools that can be approved, charter schools that can be approved by the Wyoming Authorizing Board. Substantially also in 2023, the legislature modified the funding for charter schools. I won't get into how historically they were funded, but I would note that now under the new statutes that will become effective July 1st of this year, just in a few days, charter schools will be entitled to 100% of the education resource block grant model amounts generated by their ADM, less amounts that are generated for district resources. They are also entitled to 100% of their special education costs that are reimbursable, as well as transportation costs. I would note the statute does authorize the parties to enter into an alternative agreement. I know a lot of existing charter schools have some type of alternative funding. Will be sort of interesting to see how this plays out with the 5 existing charter schools and the 3 new charter schools, because sort of puts everything back on the table with regard to their funding. As far as facilities goes, that's sort of at the end of the memo that I prepared. Within the application submitted by the charter school applicant, they're required to identify what their plan is with regard to facilities, including any requests to utilize school district facilities. As I mentioned, the bill last year sponsored by Senator Rothfuss specifically identified that charter schools can request a determination by the department with regard to charter school or existing school facilities within a school district for a charter school to utilize that's available and adequate. So in the event that there's a closed building or, there's declining enrollment and there's a building free, they can request that determination from the Department of Education, and the district is required to lease it to them at no cost. As far as approval of leases, those are there's a number of qualifications, and those are listed on the bottom of page 2 of the memo. So to have the school district approve a lease, then this is the school district would have to reimburse the charter school regardless of whether it was approved by the school district or whether it was approved by the state authorizing board in the event that the following criteria are met. If the lease payment is for an educational facility used in the actual operation of charter schools. Secondly, if it's approved to operate under those statutes that I identified previously, 301 through 314 and Title 21. If the state construction department determines there are no adequate educational facilities within the applicable school district for the operation of the charter school. If the charter school has been approved and operating for 3 years. And the school district pays the charter school the amount received for reimbursement. There's also a limitation with regard to the amount for the charter school for all leases, but that would include charter schools. And the lease facility cannot exceed the average cost per square foot for comparable lease square footage. And when making that determination, the department must take into consideration location and the type of facility to be used by a charter school.
Tanya, on that note, one of the things that I brought this as a potential discussion for this committee is that 3-year gap of major maintenance funding for charter schools, and that they have to be involved for 3 years before they start receiving that. I think that's something that this committee needs to look at and have the discussion on. Can you go into that a little bit more if you have the knowledge on that as to what the premise of that was, if you were around? Number one, you're shaking your head, no, you weren't around, but I think that's something this committee needs to be cognizant of and probably needs to take a look at as we're moving forward, because I do think it puts the charter schools at a disadvantage of having to front that cost for the first 3 years, and potentially puts us in a situation where we're not treating a charter school the same that we're treating our other public schools.
Mr. Chairman, I don't recall that decision being made specifically, and that was not changed in the 2023 session. But to your point, it's not major maintenance, it's the leasing. They're not eligible for lease reimbursement until they've been in operation for 3 years. And I think practically speaking, the reason that wasn't a problem previously is charter schools received double funding for the first year. And so they were able to sort of absorb some of those costs. But with the changes to funding, that was a policy decision that wasn't discussed in relation to the bill that was passed by the 2023 session. But to your point, probably is an issue for charter schools.
Yes, Senator Rothman.
Yeah, I'd say we missed that 3-year window, honestly. It should have been considered in the 2023 bill because as we shifted from double funding up front to a funding system that was the appropriate resources for the school facility, that should have been taken back because realistically, that was exactly how that was supposed to be funded. It was part of the original startup plan where they were supposed to, have the extra funding up front. So realistically, we probably should take that up, and I don't think it needs to be anything further than removing the sentence. I think we probably got one sentence on the 3-year requirement for leasing under that little bulleted list of requirements, and we probably need to address that as the select committee, because I agree with your analysis. It makes it inequitable. I think it was probably okay before, but at this point in time, it's a wrench that would be hard for them to overcome. They'll have to independently raise funds, which is obviously counter to the equity consideration of how we operate public schools.
Thank you, Senator Office. Anybody else on this?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Senator Hicks.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I just don't know if we need to just request LSO, get a bill draft of that for our next committee, and we don't need a formal action, but I think that's what I heard Senator Rothfuss say, and I would agree with it. We need to look at that. Question I have, and maybe somebody can answer, is this: when they authorize the charters for these, is it a 1-year renewable charter? So what's the duration or the length of time for which the charter school is authorized?
Ms.
Like,
Heitrick.
so we have a bifurcated system. We have the old system under SLIB, and now we have the new board that will start, I believe, July 1st.
Ms. Heitrick, if you'd like to go ahead.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, it's a 5-year period. So charter schools is authorized to operate for 5 years. And I think there is a provision in the law that allows them after that first 5 years to operate for a period in addition as agreed to by the authorizer and the charter school.
All right,
I can
thank you.
find that citation specifically.
And as far as, so there's kind of a double-edged sword here is why we brought the charter school issue. So number one was the 3-year repayment on this, and because we did make that change. But the other portion of this for the committee's edification is this is, again, as Ms. Heitrick has mentioned, this is a relatively new phenomenon for this committee to be diving into. I think one of the biggest issues that we need to address as a committee is the ultimate cost of what the charter schools are going to put to the facilities needs, right? And so we have some locations that have no problems with the facilities. We have some locations that cannot find a facility. And I think it's incumbent upon this. We use the term charter and we believe that that's outside the scope of being a public school, and that's not the case. They're still the responsibility of us as a state. And so it's incumbent upon this committee to make sure that we supply the facilities and that we have the information needed from not only the department and our staff, but the charters as well to make sure that we make good policy decisions as we move forward. So before we move into any formal bill drafts or requests, I do want to make sure that we give Ms. Heitrick appropriate time to go over anything further. And then we have a couple other people on the agenda as well. So Ms. Heitrick, if you have anything further.
The only items I would note is in response to the last portion of the discussion, the bill in 2023, Senate File 174, does include reporting requirements on October 1st of 2023 and each year thereafter through 2028. The state superintendent with the state construction department is required to report to the Joint Education Committee and the Joint Appropriations Committee regarding costs, not only in operation, but on the facility side too. And we can certainly ensure that this committee receives that information.
I think that'd be more than appropriate. Yes. Senator
Just to
Landon.
emphasize, really appreciated your comments. I would just emphasize that I think the biggest consideration for the select committee is this budget item. We've got to get arms around what that's, if we're going to stand up these charter schools, we've got to give them the resources they need to get the job done. And so I'll be listening carefully along the way, and where that comes into play, we'll find out. But it's going to take some additional budget to stand up charter schools.
So, Mr. Chairman, just for clarification, and I apologize, but I don't know if I heard you correctly, but just for clarification, I think in 21-3-301 through 314 is highlighted in the memo. There's a provision of statutes that says that the charter schools are public schools within those school districts. And I don't know if I heard you correctly on that. So
Yes.
we are obligated to
Yes.
provide all the facility needs for these charter schools, as I understand. Is that correct?
That's correct, Senator
Thank you.
Hicks. And basically, I will reiterate that yet again, just to make sure that it is clear. And that's, it has been utilized in the past. There has been some discussion of the charters are not public schools, and that is not the case. They are underneath the public school system, and it is our responsibility. So that's why it was why I brought it forward as a discussion topic for us to, again, not only make sure that we're funding them equitably as we start out this new process with Senate File 174 from last year, but to also make sure that we don't have any archaic statute that's still treating them any differently than our current public school system. So.
That's right, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Rothman.
And I guess while we're on this topic, I think it would be appropriate just to make a quick motion to have that bill drafted to remove the 3 years. So I'll make that motion at this time.
So I'm gonna hold off on
You
that.
wanna do it later?
Yes, so we'll open it up and do this, but we do have some other people on the agenda. And we also have public comment that we need to take on this. So Ms. Heitrick.
Just have a few final comments, and they're actually in relation to your bill, Senator. As I mentioned previously, the leases must separately identify the amounts for major maintenance, treat those separately, account for those separately, and any expenditure of those funds can also be additionally to the comments that I made previously on this bill. In the event that a charter school or a district has questions about the reasonableness of the expenditure of those funds, they can ask the state construction department to take a look at that as well. So subject to your questions, and then the last piece of information, Mr. Wilmarth would be upset if I didn't mention this, but the education resource block grant model does include funding for utilities and routine maintenance within the ADM calculation. And so those are specifically excluded from leases as well, or should be. Maybe not the lease, but at least the reimbursed expenditure from the
reimbursement versus
district.
portion of that.
They could have it within their agreement. That's within their purview, but the state should not be duplicating the funding on that front.
And that we did, if I remember right, that's part of the portion that we excluded in 174 last year. It was not.
It's existing law, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
That wasn't a change. But something that Mr. Wilmarth encouraged me to highlight.
Yes, Mr. Wilmarth.
And Mr. Chairman, there's two kind of conversations we're having here. One is regarding the lease. And the lease is specifically, and the amount that the state construction department computes as part of the gross square footage amount that they determine what's an appropriate amount to reimburse shall exclude amounts for utilities and routine maintenance. Because those are part of the block grant amount that is going to a charter school. The amounts that were excluded from a charter school's allocation through the block grant are the district level personnel. And supplies materials. So when you when the budget comes from the state construction department, that lease amount that they're including for reimbursement to be approved should not include amounts for utilities or routine maintenance as part of that budget amount. What Ms. Heitrick was alluding to is the agreement that a charter school may have with the lessor can include that, but it should not be part of the reimbursement from the state through that process.
Mr.
Mr.
Chairman.
Just for clarification, Matt, thank you for that. So at what point is the facility piece folded under? I mean, it folds into what is provided to the district, and it just calculates square footage right along with every other building in the district, and we're set up properly for that to be executed now. Can you talk a little bit more about that for me?
Mr. Chairman, the first year of operation of the chart, let me kind of step back a little bit. The block grant operates on prior year data, except for in the case of a charter school, their ADM is counted based upon an enrollment count for the first year. But that second year of operation would include any facility information or at-risk data or any prior year data that would feed into the calculation. And one of those data points is the facility data. So if a charter school, for example, up in Fremont County School District number 38, or the Snowy Range Academy in Albany 1, they're in a district-owned facility. And so that data or that facility square footage and the utility costs are included in the computation of their allocation through the block grant model. If it's a leased facility, that square footage is also included and within the computation of the block grant for routine maintenance and utilities as well. Regardless of if it's a lease space or a district-owned facility, that facility data is included in the block grant for that routine maintenance and utility funding. And that's why it's specifically called out in the statute to not include that amount as part of the lease agreement or the square footage calculation from the state construction department.
Thank you for that, Matt.
Sidetrack, anything further?
That concludes my remarks unless there are questions.
Any discussion or questions for Ms. Heitrick before we let her off the hot seat? Seeing none, thank you. The next that we have for the same area here is the department, State Construction Department, Mr. Vincent and Ms. Hughes. Good morning to both of you, and if you'd please introduce yourself for the record, and the floor is yours when you're ready.
Hey, everyone, Jerry Vincent for State Construction Department.
Good morning, Valerie Hughes, School Facilities Division Administrator.
Whoever wants to lead, all right, Ms. Hughes, please, at your leisure.
Mr. Chairman, committee members, we included in a packet some of the same similar items that Ms. Heitrick just went over in terms of the statutory framework where facilities are concerned. I will highlight, I won't kind of go through some of the things that she identified under where lease payment is due, but I'll go ahead and skip down and just note that there are sections of statute that call out in particularly 2115-109, which is the major maintenance statute that defines an educational building for the purposes of capital construction statutes and includes facilities owned by a district and used for the operation of a charter. I'll also highlight that 109 also governs the inclusion of space leased by a charter school for the purposes of major maintenance calculations. And 2115-111 defines school buildings and facilities in terms of educational programs offered by a district. Finally, 2115-123 requires the department to evaluate district-owned facilities upon request of a charter school. I highlight a couple of these just to note the differences here in the funding where facilities are concerned. The committee also asked for the department and the division to go ahead and talk about the existing charter schools here across the state. So there is in Albany County School District number 1, Laramie Montessori School. They are actually in a lease arrangement from a third party. They lease the space from a church. The state does pay those lease payments. In terms of Snowy Range Academy, they were once, they're in the same building that they started in. It was a lease arrangement to begin with, and then the state actually purchased the building and deeded that over to the school district. So they're in a district-owned facility and they're only using a portion of it. However, that may change. They may be scooping up a little bit more of a section that was once leased to another party. In terms of, I've grouped together PODER and PASS. They're under the same umbrella. It's just the grade levels that differ there. And they are actually in a facility that is owned by another third party in Laramie County School District number 1. And then in Fremont County School District number 38, as previously mentioned, that's a charter high school that's operated by the school district itself. And that's also in a district-owned building. So I guess, would you like me to stop there and just kind of open up questioning there, or keep kind of going through and wait until the very end?
Committee, any questions at this point? I guess I do have one, and it's just how you made mention as I was counting up the schools. I noticed that you say there's 4. We counted 5, but you made it very clear that Pass and Poder, that there's no differentiation between those being 2 different schools. You're just talking about them being combined into one. There's no difference in how they're refunded or how they are allocated.
They're different
resources.
grade levels and sorry, Mr. Chairman, they're different grade levels and I put them kind of grouped together, like I said, just because they're under the same umbrella.
Okay.
They are treated in 2 different ways, though, yes, as 2 individual Poder and Pass.
Okay. I guess that would be my question. Let's go ahead and we'll continue on. Since there's no questions, I'll have you go ahead and go through the rest of your memo.
Okay.
If you have anything additional to add to that.
I'm a little bit curious about the note that was provided about the Arapahoe Charter High School being moved in 2023 in their facility planning proposal. And it was a little unclear to me the implications of that move. It discusses that it's an enhanced facility and that the district would be able to use 10% of major maintenance for it. To me, once a public school is using it and it's allowable square footage effectively at that point, seems like it would then no longer be enhancement, it would be usable space. So I guess I'm not understanding the implication of that final note about the Arapahoe Charter High School. So I'd be curious for a little more detail about what we're talking about looking forward for the 2023 year.
Ms. Hughes.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss. So the existing high school was in a building that was a school building prior to that. And the district they've actually done this flip-flop once before. So that square footage, the building that they're moving into, when they originally built that building, it was deemed an enhancement because it exceeded the adequacy standards. So we had lots of discussions with them in terms of what this shift might do. It's a choice that they're making to be in proximity to another area, whereas they actually have a separate building that they're moving. They're flip-flopping administration in their high school. So they're moving the administration from what was an enhanced facility over to what the school building was that the high school was in, and moving the high school over and flip-flopping. So we've had conversations with them beforehand in terms of how this might impact their major maintenance, but it's still a decision that they're wanting to make. Granted, if for any reason they wanted to approach the commission or approach us and have a discussion about essentially saying, this is within the adequacy standards and therefore we believe it should be accepted as a full facility. But in that case, it is going to shift, right? Because like I said, they have another facility that they were using that is not an enhanced facility, that's where the major maintenance calculation was coming from for that particular school.
Yeah, follow.
So enhanced facility is kind of a questionable term. Usually you have some enhancement portion of a facility. And so I guess I'm unfamiliar with the facility and what makes it a fully enhanced facility. At some point, if it's being used as a school facility and beneficially used, you would assume that some portion of it is going to be facility and something perhaps beyond what the adequacy standards are is going to be a contemplated enhancement. But I don't see how you could classify the entire facility that's being used beneficially for public school students is going to be deemed an enhancement. It sounds like what you're saying is they would just have to come back and put in a request to reconfigure or reclassify, I guess, the school facility based on its new use as being a public school that's adequate now as opposed to being an enhancement. Is that accurate, that would be the remedy?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss. So the justification of the enhancement is because it exceeds the allowable square footage, that actual space, right? So the building was built when they didn't technically need the space, if that helps clarify in terms of why the building altogether is deemed an enhancement. It exceeded the adequacy standards for that reason, and it was also district funded. And so that's the particular there, not necessarily to say that the comments that you made, right? That the program is now going to be delivered within that space. So I think it's one of those that if, yes, their avenue is if they believe that this should be considered within the adequacy standards now because they're providing the program there, that's something that they can certainly have conversations and bring to us and we can bring forward to the commission.
Mr. Chairman, one final follow-up. Do they know that? I mean, do they understand that that is a path that's open to them clearly?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, I can't remember offhand the conversations we had, but I can certainly follow up.
Yeah, will you follow up and like CC me on, CC me on that conversation so that we make sure that they understand that that's a path that's available? Thank you.
Sure.
Senator Langdon.
Well, so thank you. Ms. Hughes, thank you. This, that was really helpful. And it seems to me like this is kind of where the rubber is going to hit the road on many fronts with regard to our move into a more robust charter school policy. We have a lot of mothballed schools. We have these enhancement areas. We've got too much square footage and not enough square footage. Can you flesh out for me or offer any comments that you've run into that, I guess what I'm asking, are there things that we need to be aware of that we may need to fix down the road? Or are we good enough that a district can come to you and just say, well, we've decided to open this school back up? It seems to me like from a school facilities committee standpoint, that could mean we've got to put some more funding back into that school to get it back up to speed. How does that all work? And isn't that really one of the bullseyes for this committee to be thinking about?
Ms. Hughes.
I hope that makes sense.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon, in terms of mothballed facilities, there's only a small number across the state. And major maintenance is still calculated for those facilities because the mothball intent is that at some point in the future, that building is going to be reopened. If there's a closed facility, the intent is obviously to dispose of it in some manner. There may be some potential financial impacts. And if we have that instance, we can certainly bring that forward. What happens is the mothball status exists for about 3 years. And then if the district decides to continue that mothball status, they'll come before the commission and ask for an extension, an additional 3 years. And there's not a limitation for how many times they can essentially do that. Did that answer the question on that?
Yeah, I think it does. It's just a piece of several things that I think going forward, we'll just have to see how this rolls out. But it just struck me thinking about this last night that there are going to be pieces of this all the way through that we're going to have to address. And this facility piece is one that it's kind of hard to get your arms around. So, yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, and I think Senator Rothfuss brings up kind of an interesting point, but I also see the other side of this that, you know, if a location happens to have enough money that they can throw together an enhancement and turn it into their own school, and then they decide they want a bigger school. So, you know, anybody decides to do that and then they move out of their old school and into this enhancement. It puts the state, then if they just switch over and go into their new enhancement, it kind of puts the state in a sticky situation. So I do appreciate you bringing that forward. And I do appreciate the good senator's point on this. I do think it's imperative, especially with these smaller school districts that are dealing with these charter schools, and they've already been dealing with this for many years now. I think it's imperative that they understand what that's going to do. So I appreciate not only the senator asking for that clarification and getting that from you guys, that they understand the implications of this, but I'd like to be a part of that as well, just to make sure that there's clarity, that we don't have anybody coming back here in the next couple of years saying, you know, we moved into this enhanced facility, they're not giving us what we're supposed to be getting, and if this is being used. This is a very clear and deliberate motion by the charter themselves. So yes, Senator Rothfuss and then Senator Hicks.
So on that point, realistically, the school district that owns the facility could lease the facility to the charter school, basically lease it to itself, or alternatively sell the facility to an LLC, have that facility or have that LLC lease it back, and we'd pay for it. So the idea that we wouldn't provide the same major maintenance for it if it were owned as an asset of the district, which is going to be in the best financial interest of the state, relative to doing one of those other more shenanigan-esque approaches to financing, I understand that, there might be some concerns, but I guess when we see those concerns pop up, maybe we can find a more nuanced way to address it, but I'd hate to push anyone towards using the other vehicles just so that they could be statutorily compliant when we have a mechanism of, yeah, it's now adequate space. The other aspect of it realistically is if it's over square footage, if it's oversized, then we already have statutory provisions to ensure whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, but that the right amount of square footage is used in the calculation for the major maintenance component, certainly of it. So some of that's already taken care of, but honestly, that opens an entirely different can of worms we've all talked about.
I appreciate it, Senator. Senator Hicks.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And kind of along those lines, but a little bit different. It's just, if you could just provide me some edification. When we talk about the Arapahoe Charter High School, and it says that it's currently within a district-owned building, and they're going to move to a district-owned building. And so contrast our obligations between a district-owned building and a state-owned building, which most of the school districts are state-owned buildings. And so are we still under the same financial obligation for a district-owned building as regular state-owned buildings? So what is the nuance? Because you specifically call out the terminology of district-owned building associated with Fremont 38 here. So I'm trying to understand the nuance difference between that and what we normally do with all school facilities.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, district-owned buildings, they're just that. They are actually owned by the district. We as a department, we as a state don't own those buildings. They actually do. So it's a little bit different in terms of, say, for the state agencies that are in state-owned buildings. Districts actually own these properties, and they are the ones that are liable for it. State provides funding for them in many different ways, but the district at the end of the day owns the building.
Any follow-up?
So, no, yeah, Mr. Chairman, I don't know that they are liable for them as far as if they're have to meet educational standards. I believe that the state's liable for that. Either the construction, the major maintenance, any of that stuff on those buildings. And so, and it gets back to this enhancement component. If we're going to do a substantial outlay in capital for enhancements and stuff on a facility, shouldn't the state take some level of interest in that? I mean, interest in fee title of those buildings if we're going to make those investments. And so, Mr. Chairman, I'm new to this committee, so I'm just trying to figure all this out, but I'm aware of the fact that there's kind of a bifurcated owner system, but we have 100% of the responsibility for the operation and maintenance of those to provide those resource or those educational opportunities, as I understand the statutes.
And Senator, thank you. Please, by all means, feel free to ask your questions. And I think it's good for the rest of the committee to hear this as well. Ms. Hughes, if you care to opine on that. Otherwise, I also might turn over to LSO on this as well. But to my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong on this, I do agree that we are liable for the adequacy of that. However, when it comes to the major maintenance funding and everything else, when it comes to enhancements, we are not subject to taking care of those facilities. Those are outside the scope of what the state has deemed adequate. And so once we have the adequacy level, that becomes our benchmark of taking care of those facilities. Above and beyond that becomes district responsibility.
So, Mr. Chairman, that helps, but I would, it helps, but it gets back to this enhancement component that we're talking about here. So we're required for the adequacy component, but this would be for this construction department. Who makes the determination of adequacy, and then the enhancement, which would be 100% of the cost of the district and a district-owned building. Is that correct?
So I'll let Ms. Hughes come into the discussion on district-owned building versus state-owned building on that and how that's tripped up.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, so to your question on adequacy, the adequacy standards are part of the School Facilities Commission rules. It's Chapter 3. So that's what's deemed kind of when we're talking about allowable square footage versus not allowable, and what under those standards is acceptable or is paid for, I should say. And so that's where we get into that enhancement square footage versus allowable square footage, and where the state pays and where the state doesn't pay. There are parts of the statute, in particular, say major maintenance, that allows for kind of like what I noted here in terms of using 10% of major maintenance towards those enhancements. So towards that square footage, but the state is paying for just that allowable square footage portion. That major maintenance calculation is just for that. It's based on the kids within those districts, within those spaces, and within the square footage across the district as a whole, educational versus non-educational. So the state is funding all of that and providing that, but that's kind of where we're at that point, right? Except for a capital construction project where the dollars are specifically identified for a purpose, or component funding that's specifically identified for a purpose. We cannot, as a department, we don't have the authority to go ahead and identify and direct where any of the major maintenance funds might be spent by a district.
Now, to my understanding, however, you guys may not have the authority to direct that, but you guys are required to check off everything that is submitted by a district. Is that correct?
Chairman Brown, that is correct. They log that in our statewide database system, and we check it against statute and whether or not that work order is acceptable and allowable under major maintenance.
So, Mr. Chairman, just one real quick.
Okay, so
follow-up.
I'm going to go to Senator Hicks and then we'll come over to Representative Harshman. Senator Hicks, follow up.
So that 10% that they can be used for major maintenance within their normal budget could be used for an enhancement or not.
Mr.
That
Chairman,
would get the sole discretion of the district.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, that's correct. And we as a department track what that portion is based on their major maintenance payments.
Mr. Chairman, on any building, including district-owned buildings.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, I'm not sure.
On
I'm
a school district-owned building, the money goes to the school district. They could take 10% of their major maintenance building and spend it on an enhancement. And you do or do not track that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, yes, that is correct. We do track that.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Harshman.
And just to be clear, all these buildings are district-owned buildings. Every building in the school district is, there are no state-owned school district buildings. Every building is district-owned. And then also, I think to be clear, that 10% of the major maintenance that can be used for enhancements is to major maintenance enhancements. And most of that is square footage that is larger than the allowable square footage, because many of these buildings were built before these standards came into effect. Well, you just toured Campbell County High School, and the hallway, the nice hallway that are not, that's part of these issues. So just to be clear, they're all district owned, and the 10% is major maintenance of enhancements, not building new enhancements with it.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Harshman, that is correct. The 10% is it still has to be a major maintenance application for an enhancement. It can't be to build new square footage with the 10%.
And Mr. Chairman, just
Yes.
follow up. And Mr. Chairman, thanks. And then so, for example, like Campbell County High School, they've got a major maintenance to fix the roof. It's above the allowable square footage. Well, they're going to use some of that to fix the roof of some extra square footage while they're doing the roof of the school. I mean, that's the idea. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Harshman, I don't believe we have any enhancements logged for Campbell County High School. So it would be full major maintenance for the roof replacement. There wouldn't be a split to say there's a percentage of the roof that covers a square footage that's it exceeds the allowable square footage. In that instance, we don't have, I don't believe for Campbell County High School.
Yes.
I don't want to, sorry if I got into the weeds a little bit. The idea is that, if a school district owns a pool and they can use 10% of major maintenance to fix the roof on the pool as well.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Harshman, yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
Vice Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So, Ms. Hughes, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about some of these things. Last night, I was reading where I think you referenced that the statute doesn't contemplate payments for charter schools approved by the state versus the district. And I didn't fully understand what that meant. So, do you have any information related to what your concern was there, or what we're lacking. If the state approves the charter school and the district did not, where's the funding piece that was referenced in the report? Can you help me with that?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon, from our perspective, there is not anything that differentiates by who is the authorizer, whether it was the SLID board that authorized or whether it was the district that authorized. We're still subject to implement under whatever statutes kind of fall under our realm, right? And stipulate to say that we have a statutory obligation to weigh in on adequate or available, right? It doesn't matter who the authorizer is there. And it doesn't matter who the authorizer was to say if they go in a district-owned building, the major maintenance should still be funneled to that charter school within the district-owned building, regardless of who the authorizer is. There isn't really that differentiator necessarily from the division or the department perspective.
So, Mr. Chairman, less of a concern than it was to just point out that the statute references both. We're not lacking something there. Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon, from our perspective, I don't believe so.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
Yes, Senator Hicks.
Just to follow up, and again, for my edification. Could we get maybe LSO to, I've never read that explicitly states in statutes that the buildings are owned by districts. So if I could just get that information, I think it'd be helpful. I wasn't aware of that, so.
Certainly. Ms. Heitrick, if you care.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, I can't point you to a specific reference that states that all facilities are owned by districts, but certainly that is the entire framework of the school facilities statutes and the governing work of the state construction department. When the state took ownership of the buildings in 1997 or, the early 2000s, it wasn't ownership in the traditional sense. I've had this discussion recently with another member. The district maintains ownership of all of those facilities. Although the state is obligated to oversee those and provides funds for construction and maintenance, routine maintenance, the ownership of those was not transferred to the state.
I would say, thank you, Tanya. The difference I think maybe that we're getting hung up on is maybe use layman terms as opposed to ownership, but responsibility for versus title, right? So they're titled, the buildings are going to be titled at the local school district level, but the responsibility falls at the state. And that has been the case since 1997. So
we're the fiduciary as far as the trustee on those facilities.
say that again, I'm sorry.
We're the fiduciary or the trustee.
Absolutely.
So it'd be helpful for me if we could just get a brief memo on that, Mr. Chairman, I think, just to clarify when it transitioned due to the lawsuits in the 97 and that responsibility. I could just be going forward. It clarifies what exactly our responsibility is.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman, we'll have that for the next meeting.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Absolutely. Good question. Thank you. Yes, Senator Brightman, please.
Sorry for the newbies here asking all the questions, but trying to get up.
No need to be sorry.
So in a case where a school owns an older school that's no longer being used, but they still own it. I assume they're getting paid major maintenance on that school. Is there a requirement that the major maintenance money paid on behalf of that mothballed or non-used facility? Is there a requirement that the money has to go to that school to upkeep it so absolute disrepair and be no longer valuable, or can they still use that money for whatever purposes they choose? And it's up to them to decide whether they're going to let that facility continue to deteriorate. Does that make sense?
Ms. Hughes.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Beitman, you're absolutely correct in that the district has the ability and has the latitude to decide whether or not to expend major maintenance funds on that facility or any facility within their district. It's given as a lump sum, and we as a department don't have the ability to designate where those funds need to go to take care of any or all facilities within the district.
So just as a kind of, yes, Ms. Heitrick.
I would just add, there will be additional information, Mr. Chairman, Senator Beitman, on this afternoon with regard to the budget and the facility planning, but sort of in follow-up to Mrs. Hughes' testimony, districts are required through their facility plans, which is a long-range comprehensive plan to identify how they're going to expend their major maintenance funds, any construction requests, anything like that. And so that's their opportunity to work with the state to get approval for expenditure of those major maintenance funds. But in response to your direct question, no, there's no prohibition and there's no requirement that they expend the funds generated by those square feet for major maintenance on that specific building. But there are rules and regulations and statutes dictating how major maintenance, what can be expended for major maintenance purposes for school buildings.
So just as kind of I did ask Mr. Holmes while we were touring yesterday, one of the things that occurs at Campbell County High School is they only receive about 65% of the allowable square footage for major maintenance on that facility. So that means if they're, if they could be required or could be getting $1 million, they're only getting $650,000. So if there was something as we saw the sewer pipe, right? And let's just say that's $1 million, they would have to find somewhere in their formula to come up with the other $350,000 to fix that particular pipe, right? So that's why we give the latitude to the local school district. They're the ones on the boots on the ground doing this every single day, as opposed to the department who has got 5-6 staff to try to take care of. I can't even remember the number of buildings that we have throughout the state. We provide that local control. This has been a point of contention back and forth as to how major maintenance funds are expended, but certainly is, to your point, yes, they have that ability to let things deteriorate, but that is also something that the legislature in general has created, and that's kind of the system that we have in place. Is kind of this. I continue to use the term perverse system that if we allow our older schools to deteriorate, it moves us further up the list. The second that we put $1 into that school, it knocks us down and we don't have a new school. So it creates a little bit of a perverse system for some abuse, if you will. But I would say that the majority of our school districts take that major maintenance and do put that to good work in their district. So Senator Rothfuss.
We had a memo, I want to say 2 years ago, that was a look at allowable square footage for major maintenance and number of students in the district. So it provided a look at which districts were constrained based on student count and or square footage and excess square footage. I think it was 2 years ago. It could have been early last year. But I know Matt knows what I'm talking about. And I think all of our new committee members would benefit from that memo. I don't even think it needs to be updated because it probably hasn't changed very much. So if we could get that sent around, that would be helpful.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, in Senator office, you are correct. In big picture terms, the total educational square footage exceeds the allowable square footage by approximately $4 million or 4 million square feet. And so that 4 million square feet does not generate major maintenance allocations to school districts. So districts are then left to maintain that facility with the major maintenance funds allocated under the formula. The same thing under the routine maintenance. We limit the square footage to the lesser of 115% of the allowable or their actual. So if they have excess square footage, they have to maintain that under the constraints of the major maintenance and routine maintenance formula.
I do want to pull us back into agenda here. We've kind of derailed a little bit away from the charter schools. I do have a question regarding just as we go back into the leasing and how leases are done. How do you guys handle the leasing, and when it comes to routine maintenance, how do you guys handle the discussion with the individual school districts and the reimbursement schedule? As we heard from LSO earlier, I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page when it comes to making sure that we don't have duplicative funding when it comes from the leasee and the lessor versus the state paying those extra funds, because underneath it looks like there's just a slight differentiation between what LSO has reported to us versus what you have reported to us for like Laramie, Montessori and Poder. It looks like that there's slight differentiation. So I'm just curious, how do you guys calculate that? What is your guys' process for how those leases are conducted and whether or not those are done. If you guys can maybe hit on that a little bit, I would appreciate it.
Mr. Chairman, my colleague, Laura Anderson actually handles the calculation of the square footage where the lease payment is concerned. I would say that in terms of the actual lease agreement itself, the state is not party to it. So we're calculating that and we're providing the information over, and then we get copies of those lease agreements back. I know in a couple of these situations, when I took a look at the lease agreements, there may have been more money that the lease arrangement was for, yet the state is only paying for a portion of it. So I'll have to go back and look at those particular ones, but my assumption is the reason for that is because of that, exactly what you mentioned in terms of utilities and or routine maintenance.
I would appreciate that. If you guys could follow up with the committee on that, I would appreciate that. And then you haven't hit it yet, but I am curious. Well, we kind of touched it, but not exactly. So I'm curious, your guys' interpretation, if you guys can fill me in as the chairman and the rest of the committee in as the committee on this particular issue when it comes to charter schools, how you guys interpreted the adequate and available discussion when it comes to the charter schools that applied for that determination from you guys. How did you guys, what facility plans did you guys use? How did you guys make that determination? Was it a simple phone call? Was it looking at the schools, the school district's facility plan and outreach? If it was the plan, what year was that plan based off of? How did you guys make those determinations so the committee is fully aware of what occurred with those processes?
Mr. Chairman, it kind of differs in terms of, we've got two instances, two of the three charter schools that were approved by the SLIB that were looking at district-owned facilities. In the case of Platte County School District number 1, that charter school first looked at a facility that is in mothball status. It was a former school that was used by the district. We actually were able to go and visit that site. And so we were able to look at it firsthand, notate things, and then also use that data in comparison to also what the facility condition assessment said for that facility. So in terms of the condition of it or adequacy of that facility, we made our determinations based on that combination. In addition to the fact that it had been sitting vacant for a period of time, looking at what major maintenance may have or may not have been spent on the facility. In terms of availability, that one was obviously a vacant facility. Whereas in the instance of, say, Laramie County School District number 1, we had the instance of a vacant facility. We had discussions with that particular district during the 2023 facility plan, during which point we were told that they were not using the facility. They had actually been contemplating potential disposition of the facility. So in terms of available, that was part of it. Also taking into account that the district themselves had used that facility just within the recent past, within less than a year, and had students within the facility. So that plays into adequacy as well, right? In terms of it was adequate for the educational program at that time. And so it's really dependent on each of the situations to say what's the best information we have available. And it's a combination in terms of that particular facility as well. For condition of it, condition assessment was considered. We had requested the ability to tour the site, and it just we weren't able to do so. So it's a whole combination of what is the best available information to make those determinations, and it's documented in a final letter.
Yes, Senator Landon, and then Representative Olson.
So, Mr. Chairman, thank you. So, Ms. Hughes, thank you for that. Just remind me that major maintenance funding that goes to the district, it doesn't really change if they reopen the mothballed school. Isn't that correct? We don't reduce the amount. If they mothball the school, we don't reduce the amount that the district gets for major maintenance. Is that correct? So, or is that a reduced amount? And then if we take the mothballs out of the school and stand it back up again, do those major maintenance dollars go up at that point?
Ms. Hughes?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon, there was a provision that once was in School Facilities Commission rules that did have a percentage decrease on mothballed status where major
Gotcha.
maintenance was calculated. As it stands now, that was removed from the rules. So the intent is to give full major maintenance for that facility so that it can be maintained for a future potential option to open.
So, hold
follow
on,
up.
hold on. Yep. I can bring it back here to Senator Landon first.
Well, just real quickly to follow up on that point, is that in some of the rules that we just now received as of this past week, or was that, because I kind of recalled that we had reduced that major maintenance amount if a school was mothballed, but
Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon, I believe it was back in 2018, I think. I had to do a little homework on this and I've actually got it on my desk, but there was a reduction that was in School Facilities Commission rules at a former time. In a 2018 revision, that got removed from commission rules. So it's not the most recent emergency rules that you're seeing. This precedes that.
That was my next question. Representative Olson and then Representative Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to go back to the adequacy and availability analysis example that you were walking through with Laramie 1. To be clear, you weren't allowed access to the facility. You had requested access to the facility, and it's my understanding you were never given access to the facility. My question is, in that scenario, this goes back to Senator Hicks's question on ownership. I mean, if the legal title is held by the district, and the statute requires you to do an availability or an adequacy rather analysis, which intuitively says, hey, you need to visit the facility. What can we, is there something we can do statutorily to provide more teeth to that? Or do you see, I mean, it doesn't seem to work when the holder of the keys is the one that has to give you access, and the statute says you have to go and do this analysis. What can we do to make that work?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Olson, in terms of, like I said, we use the most available information at the time, and we were not allowed access to the facility. However, with the combination of the fact that the educational program had been delivered within that site just recently, it's one of those that taken into consideration with the condition of the facility, we felt that we were able to go ahead and make the determination. Granted, the way that statute's written, we don't have the authority to compel a district to then allow a charter to enter into a facility. That's kind of where the line is drawn in the sand there.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm just talking about access to the facility so you can do your job. Right now, you have to access facilities on a routine basis in order to do the evaluation on maintenance and et cetera. What do you run into other instances where a school district won't let you in? And if so, that's what I'm trying to get to, is how can we make sure that you have access to the building to do your job?
Mr. Chairman.
Or you said it's sufficient, you were sufficiently able to do the analysis without access. Maybe it's not that big of a deal.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Olson, we apologies, I just lost my train of thought on it.
Chair, I would like to say this part. Access is helpful. You know, when this bill first passed, we met with Valerie and I did with some of the bringers of it and said, we don't want to overreach. What do you think the intent here was of this bill on what we are supposed to do and not do? You know, so when you talk about access, having our team be able to get into the Chugwater School in Plat 1, you have your facility plan, you have your FCA and I scores, but visually looking at it, the district appears to have done the right thing and start removing components that keep utilities and systems up and running so they can put them to use in other schools and everything. So it wasn't a functioning system right off the bat in order to get that going, which could have been a couple $1 million. And then cabinetry and some other things are removed. We wouldn't have known that through a report, right? We wouldn't have known that through anything else. The tour is what helped us understand that.
I want to take a quick question, then I'll come over real quick. So I just want to make sure quickly, you guys did say this was off the 2023 discussion with the district. Is that right?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. In the instance of Laramie County School District, they came back with more information when they made the decision to house ARP children up at Eastridge at that point in time. We took that into consideration and we actually issued an updated determination letter after that. And Mr. Chairman, Representative Olson, I remembered what I was going to start with. It's not a common occurrence that we have districts not allow us on site. Generally speaking, districts have been amenable to that.
Representative Harshman, thank you for waiting. Appreciate it.
Chairman, I just want to get clarification on this mothball issue. I think just my memory is that we put it in statute, I believe, not rules, but a mothballed school doesn't come close to drawing the full major maintenance. It's a small fraction, and I'd like to ask our staff what that is.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Representative Harshman, the statute is 2115-109 subsection C paragraph 4. It provides for any square footage of any district or building or facility which is closed and not operational is not being replaced under a district's facility plan under 2115-116 is not determined surplus by the department and is specified as a closed building within the district's facility plan as a cost-effective or cost-efficient means to address future district building needs shall be segregated from the square footage of other district buildings and facilities and multiplied by the replacement value under paragraph C5 of this section for their appropriate building category. And then it directs that the resulting amount shall then be multiplied by the exterior closure factor established by the department based upon the most current edition of the Whitestone Building Maintenance and Repair Cost Reference Index and added to the total amount determined for major maintenance. In layman's terms, what that means is that square footage is segregated from any other educational building square footage multiplied by the replacement square footage amount. And that resulting amount is then multiplied by 10%. That's what their formula or spreadsheet has in their calculation. And that is the amount is allocated under the formula.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, committee. There's going to be a test at the end of the day on that exact question and answer. So make sure that you understand and remember that 10% is
Mr. Chairman,
the key. Yes, Senator Hicks.
I want to just take up real quick where Representative Olson lost. And so we through the statutory obligation says that the school facilities commission will go out and they'll evaluate these schools if there's a determination to make a determination whether there's any space that may be available for charter schools.
Bring your mic a little closer.
And then what we found out in the performance of their duties, they were denied access to be able to do the very duty that we've chartered them to do. And so I think there's a little bit of a conundrum there that we probably need to clean up. And Mr. Chairman, if we could just capture that as maybe a potential part of a bill draft. It just does strikes me that we tell them to go do the job and looking to make a determination whether there's adequate space or not. And then they're told you can't go look at the facility is pretty inconsistent on, I think, what the intent was of the program. And we probably just need to clean that up.
I would tend to agree. I think there's probably some levels of miscommunication across the board, but I do agree that when we task the department to do something, they should have the tools in their belt available to take care of the task that we've asked them to do via statute. So with that, Ms. Heitrick, you're good. Okay. Anybody else right now? Okay. I do have another question. I think we've made it through your guys's memo. Is that right? So I am curious on how the situation is occurring right now when it comes to last year's changes in statute, and specifically Senate Bill 174 or Senate File 83. I'm sorry, when it comes to the major maintenance and everything else that Senator Rothfuss brought forward. I am curious what the status of that is and how that's working in through the existing leases, whether you guys have updated those leases, how that's working through your guys's, and I guess you guys wouldn't be updating the leases, but how you guys are working through that process with everything that has been codified into law and will take effect on July 1st.
Mr. Chairman, is the question in terms of whether those lease arrangements contemplate major maintenance of the third party owned facility? Is that, I'm sorry, I think I'm misunderstanding what the question is.
So basically, how are you guys incorporating the changes in state law into the existing leases that are currently existing right now? And whether that's existing leases like the Montessori school in Laramie, but I guess mainly more focused on the new leases that were approved through SLIB that are going to be going to the charter school. And I guess I'll tack on to that. My bigger question, I guess, that I'm building to is what is the status of those particular SLIB approved charters? Have those been moved to the charter school governing board, or are they still underneath SLIB? I guess what I'm trying to get to is what is the status of what we've done in the past since session ended? One of those bills became effective immediately. The other one doesn't come effective until July 1st. What is the status of those leases with you guys' department?
Mr. Chairman, that actually, that switch from SLIB over to the charter board is not something that the school facilities division has a hand in. I'm not sure if Director Vincent has more of an update in terms of department wide, because that most certainly doesn't kind of fall under.
Okay,
this
that
umbrella.
would be helpful. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In regards to the charter for Plat 1, they have met with the district 3 times in board meetings. They had a board meeting which they're with them this week. The first school that Valerie referred to, we found it not adequate. Then they approached us again for a letter. Can we share the other school with the district? And we're looking at enrollment for both, and we're about to write a letter that you can join, and you can go in there. And then the district shifted those students in their last meeting in May and left the school empty right now. So now the letter comes out in a third way that says it is empty, and they were using it adequately right up until this year. And so it's available. So the feedback that we got from the charter school CEO is that they met with the board in that meeting, that they came to an agreement, and the next day the district opened up with keys and walked them through the facility, and they think they're on their way from getting an MOU together on what's ours, what's yours, and where the money comes from. And we've given them their letter saying that they're approved to go into that school. As far as the Laramie 1 charter, I do not know where that's at. And the Casper charter has changed in a different way, because they were going into a private school or a private building at first, and now they're changing to a public. Is that correct? So I don't think we have an update on that, but maybe Valerie.
Mr. Chairman, in terms of the charter up in Casper, the original intent there was to use a building that was owned by the city of Mills. We haven't been tasked or asked for a determination on any district-owned facility at this time. I know that they're interested in a potential build in the future, and actually we were just kind of discussing this before the meeting started. We may be having a meeting to kind of talk through what that means in terms of whether or not there's any state funding associated with a build such as that. But that's kind of where that one stands.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, I thought that you were asking for the actual transition over between the two. I didn't.
No worries. It was kind of a muddled question. Again, I was building up to a larger question that I just decided to make one big question. So
Mr. Chair,
Senator Landon.
Just a quick curiosity, Director, has the authorizing board been seated? I mean, are we fully seated, and is that board up and running? Then the second question is, can you remind me what the relationship is of that authorizing board with regard to state construction? Did we even contemplate that during the session? In other words, here it is over here, and are we over here?
So, Mr. Chair and Senator Landon, when we met with some of the bringers of the bill, they said, hey, we did this pretty quickly. I think by fall, you're probably going to want to make some recommendations about cleanup language. And I said, I think we're going to get hit with the AAAs. I mean, what does adequacy mean if it's going to be put in quotes, and where's authority, and then where's availability? Some of those we're trying to find out where we reach. We don't see that we are connected with them right now. A question has been brought up, and we also don't see this being us right now. So maybe this can help from clarifying. Like Valerie said, we go out and look at a school site. If they're in a church and they want to move to another church, want to move to a city building, want to do somewhere else, we don't feel we belong doing that adequacy review. Or at least we don't believe it tells us to do the adequacy review. So there's some things that are silent that maybe this or an interpretation of the bill through LSO can help us understand. Because
So-
these three have come very quickly in just the last 60 days.
So, Mr. Chairman, that's something we may want to think about as a select committee to at least build a bridge, over to that authorizing board. I think that's important that we have communication all the way around. So
We would agree.
Tanya?
Mr. Chairman, Chairman Landon, the statute does contemplate in the application that the party presents facility information. They're required to present that to the authorizing board. And recall that these are school district schools. So even if it's approved by the state authorizing board or the 3 schools approved by the SLIB, they are a public school located within the school district in which they're operating. And so the intent is that they would be folded into that process for the district. So, for Platte County, they would now be, at the table, sort of at their annual facility planning process to come forward with whatever their facility plan would be coming forward. They're a public school, just like every other public school in the state.
Thank you, Tanya.
Mr. Chairman, I would just note, though, that the difference or the defining factor there is whether or not they're in a district-owned building. So it's one of those that right now the statutes are specific for us in terms of district-owned. So in the lease arrangements, it's different. And I know that I only say that because up in Casper, going into a building that's owned by the city of Mills, that would be a lease arrangement with them. That would not be a district-owned building. So in terms of facility planning, yes, we still go through facility planning the same. And that's the case with the existing ones. Podare and Pass, they're in a third-party owned building. We still meet with them and go through a facility and planning process, just like we do with Snowy Range that's in a district-owned building. So.
Okay. That actually helps. Thank you for that clarification. And I also do think maybe we've sidetracked a little bit. I actually heard Representative Olson kind of mention to maybe me in the ear here that this is maybe a little outside the scope of the board department here answering, and that maybe we might have a few of these questions answered by our next person who's going to be coming up. So any further questions for the department and related to charter schools? Nothing further here. Thank you, Jerry and Valerie. Appreciate your guys' testimony and your guys' answering to our questions.
Thank you very much.
Next, we have got Chief Shaner with the Department of Education, and then we will have public comment. But Chief Shaner, I believe you're probably going to have some discussion on maybe the questions that were just asked at the very end there on the SLIB board versus the authorizing board. And maybe if you incorporate that in, if you've got the availability, we'd appreciate it.
Would be happy to, Mr. Chairman. Dickie Shaner, Department of Education. Happy to be here today and answer any questions. Just to jump in right on that one, the SLIB will have this on their agenda in early August. And at that time, they will transfer the 3 authorized charters and their contracts to the newly comprised state authorizer. As well as that time, we anticipate that the Cheyenne charter will request an extension of its contract for a year since they were unable to open this year. So that we anticipate that happening in August. The governor announced his appointees yesterday, I believe. I don't want to speak out of turn if he hasn't yet, but I know they're working on that because July 1st is when both the superintendent and the governor will have to announce their appointees. And then there are some other standard members on there. The Dean of the University of Wyoming College of Education and the State Board of Education Chairman. So we've got the governor appointees, superintendent appointees, and then the State Board Chair and Dean of UW College of Ed.
Dickie, just real quick, you mentioned my biggest concern is the Laramie County one right now, asking for that delay. The expectation, I know you're going out on a limb here if you choose to answer this, but is it expected that they're going to grant that 1-year extension? Because that could be an open opportunity for another charter school. One of the discussions we heard was there's potential for more charter schools to want to come in. Do you have any idea of what the SLIB may vote on and whether or not they grant that extension, or is that going to be denied and they're going to open that up for another charter to come in? Do you have any idea on that?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I don't, other than I do believe they will, first they have to make a decision on whether the SLIB will decide that or whether they pass the buck of that decision on to the new authorizing board. So I think that would be the first decision. Then once that decision's made, then they'll decide sort of whether or not it's granted.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions on the SLIB stuff? Okay, Chief, thank you very much. I'll let you go ahead and walk into your presentation, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll be brief so we can spend time on questions. But as I just stated, the big next step is the July 1 authorizing board, which will be announced and appointed. And then we will be staffing that. We have a person who is doing some already an employee at the department that we upclassified, added a little extra compensation to now be the state charter school director as well. And then hiring another employee under her to be focused on charter schools as well. So we'll have two Department of Ed employees working with the state authorizer and all the people that are appointed on that to work with our state authorized charter schools. We've also retained the services of a national expert on state charter authorizers who's worked at in some mountain states and really has been instrumental in helping us guide the resident school districts and the state authorized charters through this, what we've been calling year zero, this like planning up into when you open in the fall, because there's a lot of pieces that have to be sorted through and have to be figured out. When we talk about the rules for the department, particularly related to the state authorized charters, really all we're going to be doing is changing sort of technical updates related to the authorizer being the SLIB, and now it'll be the state authorizing board. So some technical amendments there with our rules. Funding is a big issue, and this is going to take some time. And I put it in two buckets, the federal funding and the state funding. So with the federal funding, all of these different programs have applications with different rules that have different timing in terms of when you submit your application to the feds and what the funding's based on, free and reduced lunch, how many, the census, all these different criteria. And so we have to now resubmit those as they come up, contemplating essentially a new school district, a new LEA, which is a federal term for a school district, to try to disentangle the resident school district from the state authorized charter, because the ultimate goal is to have those state authorized charters independent from their resident school district, reporting to that state authorizer and working with the department. But it's going to take some time to get that federal funding flow through, which right now is going through the local school district separated. But it's been done in other states. It's possible. It's just we're going to have to work through all those different applications, Title I, Title II, Title III, IDEA, all those different funding mechanisms. When it comes to state funding, we think we may need some legislative changes next session related to this, because as we interpret the laws right now, the block grant funding must go through the local school district and then to the state authorized charters. What we hope to see in the future is that the local school district does not have to be a pass-through for that block grant funding and the other funding like special education and transportation reimbursements. But as the law stands right now, we don't think that ability exists. So the plan is the local school districts have something called a Fund 80, which they can sort of funnel money to other governmental entities from their school district, the state authorized charter being one. So that's sort of the accounting mechanism they're going to use to pass through their entitlement payments until we can untangle that. And then, another issue that exists, we were talking earlier about the delay in getting your major maintenance funding. Another thing we've been working through is the state authorized charters no longer have that double ADM that they once was contemplated. That got removed this last session. And so with special education and transportation, those are reimbursements done a year later. So the state authorized charters, in this case, it'll be Platte and Natrona, they're going to have to figure out a way to pay for their special education and transportation expenses, if they have any, this first year before they'll get reimbursed. And so that's something we've been talking about. We don't really have a mechanism at our department to sort of loan money up front or anything like that. But that's something I wanted to make you aware of too, with that delay with the SPED and transportation reimbursements. And then also we included a attachment A to our memo, which is a 3-page table. And this just breaks down all of the funding model components and whether or not an ECA applies to those components, and then whether or not a state authorized charter receives those components. And as I believe LSL mentioned earlier, really the distinction here is that the district level resources are primarily staying with the resident school district and not going to the state authorized charter. And the school level resources are going to the state charter. With the exception of at the top of page 2, you'll see central office staff, maintenance and operations such as custodians that actually will go to the state authorized charter. Mr. Chairman, that's a summary of the material submitted and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Chief. One question that I have up front is going back to your statement on, I've got too many different pages going on here, but your statement regarding the changes to statute, those are going to be a little outside of the scope of this particular committee. Is that something you're working with the education chairman on? Is that something that you're requesting out of this committee to duly work on?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree. It's probably not within the purview of this committee. Just wanted to raise it since that delay issue was brought up earlier. But yeah, we'll certainly work through joint ed and other members.
Okay. Committee, any questions for Chief Shaner? Yes, Representative Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief Shaner, thanks for being here. I just question really on this accounting piece. And you said that when you think about the reimbursements for sped and transportation and think about like Natrona County School District, you're going to have now another school in the district that's a charter school. And it seems like it'd be easier to just keep that flowing like it is, because Natrona County School District knows the special ed costs at Park School and Cottonwood School and the transportation costs there. And then, you know, there's these variations over each year, and they're able to, throughout the whole system, account for those and then get reimbursed the next year. But it seems like you pull this out, who's going to do the accounting? I mean, it's going to have, are we going to have to hire somebody else in your agency to, I mean, we've already got these people in the districts that do this for a living and they're really good at it. And to add one more little line in the accounting for a Casper charter school doesn't seem like a big workload, and it flows right through and we know the dollars and it's easily accountable. So I guess I think that's a good thing. I think because we already have this structure in place and it shouldn't cost us any more money, because part of the criticism of charter schools, amongst regardless of whether you're for or against, it's going to cost us a bunch more money. It's not going to save us money. It's going to cost us more money. And so it seems like that proposal would just add more cost to this, more bureaucracy. So what's your thoughts on that? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chief
Through you,
Shaner,
Representative Harshman, thanks for sharing. We've had almost weekly meetings with various charters and school districts. And one sentiment that really is shared by both parties, at least to this extent, is to really untangle the two, because the state authorized charters, they didn't go through their local district to get authorized. And so, a local district doesn't want to be responsible for IDEA responsibilities, things of that nature. And so each charter is going to be responsible for its own data reporting. The one in Casper has a large outfit that does charter school back office functions across the country. The one in Platte is working on getting its own student information system as well. So they need to have data and financial people to do the lift for their schools and working through the state authorizer and the department.
And Chief, I also remember we did authorize, I believe, one position within your department to assist in the development of the charter school process. Is that position filled at this point?
Mr. Chair, we've just finished interviews last week. So I believe that person, if hasn't been notified, will be soon and will be on board.
Mr. Chairman, just to
Yes,
follow
Senator
up
Hicks.
from what Representative Harshman's comment was, so we already have charter schools in place, and specifically with SPED and transportation. How are we handling those now, and why would this be different with the new charters?
Chief Shaner.
Sure. Mr. Chairman, through you, Senator Hicks, The difference is the existing charters went through their local board to be approved. Here you had a situation where 3 charters went outside of their local board and went to the state to get authorized. So there wasn't that sort of level of collaboration and level of governance anymore by the local board of trustees. The governance is now at the state. And so there's a desire to just keep that governance straight to the state and not, continue to entangle the local district in a state authorized charter.
Follow up?
Well, so I'm assuming those ones that, are we going to have a 2-tiered system now for those charter schools that were authorized by those local school boards? And now we're going to have another system for those charter schools that were authorized by a state authorizing board doing the exact same thing. Are we going to convert those over to one size fits all or not? So now we're creating 2 systems.
It's Chief Shaner, I'll let you go ahead, and then if you don't.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, through you, Senator Hicks. That's correct. It will be 2 systems. And it's actually somewhat common across the country to have what's called dual authorization opportunities for charter schools to either be locally authorized by their board or have some sort of state authorizing mechanism, which two different sets of authorizing governance structures, either the state or the local board of trustees. And in this situation, we'll have 3 that work through their state authorizer, and the ones that have already been authorized by the local board will continue to work with their local board.
And I think just to follow up on that on a point of non-factual basis, just a little bit of maybe conjecture here that there has been that discussion all along, right? That's part of the complaint to this, but that's why there's also the carrot and the stick approach to continue to go through the local school districts, because they already have those resources. They already have everything going down there. So little outside of the scope of the facility side of things, certainly down more along the lines of joint ed. So do appreciate your input on that, Chief, and thank you for the information on this. Any further questions? Yeah, Representative Harshman.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate when you look at it from the school board, the local school board's perspective, it's probably 100%. Yeah, we really don't want that responsibility when we don't have the governance, the approval. So that makes perfect sense. But I think it'll be important and not this committee so much, the facilities piece, yes, but joint education appropriations and management council, just kind of see what this is costs, and just kind of keep that. It's important to know what we're getting into. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Representative Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief Shaner, does you or the superintendent have any opinion on going back to the facilities? And this committee possibly sponsoring legislation to eliminate the 3-year gap does the superintendent have a position on that?
Mr. Chairman, through you, Representative Olson, I haven't specifically asked her that, but I can certainly ask her and have her respond to you or to the committee.
I think that's a good question. I think probably be worth just getting a response on. Nothing too serious on that yet.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Vice Chairman.
I just wanted to say, Chief Shaner, it's good to have you home.
Hey, thank you. Great to be here.
Any further questions for Chief Shaner? See, yes, Senator Hicks. Microphone.
Based on the testimony that Mr. Shaner gave on the budget difficulties associated with these new charters and the reimbursing spend, you're right, that's a joint education committee issue that we don't.
Yep. And yep, and I can tell you as a member of that committee, we're already in there nice and deep. So. All right, Chief Shaner, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's see here. Next on the agenda, I believe, is public comment. So we will open this up to public comment. I imagine we have, yes, Ms. Klein, if you would like to join us. Please introduce yourself for the record, and the floor is yours when you're ready.
Morning. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for your time. My name is Carrie Klein, and as many of you know, I was working with public charter schools and charter school policy this last year. And I just want to take the opportunity I just have a couple of comments here to offer today. First of all, take a breath. It's been a while. So I apologize, a little nervous this morning. First, I wanted to let you know that we are working to establish a nonprofit statewide association of public charter schools here in the state of Wyoming. The association will be a hub for existing public charter schools, new charter schools coming in, and other stakeholders to learn and share best practices, be accountability partners with both their authorizers and the Department of Education, and to speak with a cohesive voice when working with legislators and policymakers. So just want to let you know that we look forward to hopefully having that up and running this year. Wanted to thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee for the discussion today about public charter schools and facilities. There is work to be done to ensure that public charter schools and their students are treated equitably. Facilities are an important piece of this. As we've already discussed this morning, the bill that passed this last year did remove the double funding for the public charter schools, and that funding that they received the first year would have helped with their startup costs, including facilities. And as Chief Shaner mentioned, costs such as upfronting for first year for SPED, any transportation. The requirement that a public charter school be in operation for 3 years prior to receiving any facility funding was left in place, as you have already discussed. So finding and acquiring a school facility is an extra burden those first few years of operation. We feel that the policy decision to support charter schools in Wyoming is the correct one, and we have to continue to find solutions to the complex facility funding issue. We acknowledge the nuances and complexity of this issue. I'll be very honest and say that I have just hit the tip of the iceberg when trying to learn about school facilities, how they're funded, how they work in the state of Wyoming, and how that impacts charter schools as well. We want to make sure that charter schools fit into this process in an appropriate way so that these students are treated fairly. I'm ready to work with you and learn from what other states are currently doing, work with appropriate stakeholders, and thoughtfully bring a solution, hopefully, to this very complex issue. I think we need to really continue to work together to bridge that facility funding gap and find equitable solutions for the students that are being served in these public schools. So with that, I am happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Ms. Klein. Any questions? Again, yes, Representative Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Klein, with the charter schools that you work with, elaborate a little more, going back to the one thing that this committee really can deal with, which is the facility gap. Elaborate on how that would impact if we didn't make that change and the charter schools that you work with had to wait 3 years for funding. How would that impact them?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Olson. Well, the biggest impact is being felt right now with the removal of the double funding for that first year. And so schools are in a position of not only having to find the facility and secure that, but also not having a little bit of extra funding to make the appropriate lease agreements or any kind of improvements that might be needed on a mothballed school they're utilizing, et cetera. So I think that finding a way that is appropriate to help charter schools in that beginning that first year to get some funding to specifically work to utilize to help them obtain that facility that would leave the other pools of money that they qualify for to be able to provide academic instruction, hire teachers, et cetera. So being able to have a specific facility piece does add to their ability to be successful those first years.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman, follow up. Do you have an opinion on what would be more beneficial for those schools? A reinstatement of the double funding? Is that really the solution? Because that was at one time the policy decision that this legislature made, or just simply the elimination of the 3-year funding gap?
Ms. Klein?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Olson, I don't know. That's not a discussion we had or that I've had with any of the charter schools coming in of which they would see would be more beneficial immediately and long-term. So I could certainly ask and we can go down that road.
Anything further? Right. Thank you,
Let
Ms.
me
Klein, for
offer
being here.
Thank you.
And just from the committee's perspective, I'll speak on behalf of the committee here. Our sincere condolences to you, but we are happy to see you here. And we're happy to have you with us. So thank you. All right, any further public comment? Seeing nobody jumping up and rushing to the microphone. We are a full hour ahead of schedule, Mr. Vice Chairman. This is,
High 10, right?
yeah, so,
Surprised Senators aren't begging for a break.
yeah, yeah.
Us 10 minutes for a break.
I was gonna say, I think what we'll do at this point is we will take about a 10 or 15-minute break. We will reconvene and we'll determine whether or not we want to take the next topic ahead. What's that? Oh, yes, so directives, yes. So actually, let's go ahead and take our 10, 15-minute break first, and then we'll come back and we'll do that. And then we'll see if we can't make that last a little bit, move us into our lunch hour. So we'll be back here at 10:45. Looks like we're back on, so we're gonna come back to order. And as we're coming back to order, I do want to open up, I do see former Representative Clem is here and has asked if he would be allowed, as he left for just a few seconds, and was curious if he had a public comment as it pertains to charter schools. So Representative Clem, welcome and good to see you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee. Good to see you all. I'm here more for my school today, but I was listening to the charter school conversation, and so I thought I would just kind of roll some of my comments together because I think it's pertinent for the conversation that you just had. Keep in mind, since I left the legislature, I haven't paid really a lick of attention. I see what's in the news headlines, and that's about it. And so, forgive me if my comments seem superficial or like I should know more knowledge, or if this is something that's common to you all, it's already been addressed. Take it for what it is, I guess, in that regard. When it comes to funding for charter schools, there was the conversation there of, funneling money, I guess, through the different school districts. The first thing that came to my mind was, well, that's kind of like money laundering. That's essentially what people do for money laundering, is running funds through something else. And of course, I understand some of the benefit when you're talking about pre-existing processes and knowing what to expect when it comes to things like transportation or perhaps special education. So there's definitely some benefit there to using some of those existing mechanisms. However, in the conversation and in hearing about kind of these two systems that compete with one another, obviously having monies that are entangled, certainly that's a ripe for tension and problems. And obviously you would want to try to mitigate that when at all possible, particularly if we have a system now that allows for charter schools to circumvent a local school district and go straight to the state. That competition is good. I think competition produces excellence. But if there is a school district in particular that really isn't wanting to play ball, you just create those unnecessary tensions. And so I think that does need to be resolved in that way. Furthermore, it brought to my mind 3 golden rules of history. I don't know if any of you ever heard of this, but first golden rule is he who owns the gold makes the rules. And of course, if the money is coming from a certain location, maybe there's some power struggle that might go on there. And the second golden rule is the hand that gives is above the hand that receives. And so again, you have some of that disparity. So the only other thing that I would comment on, and the reason why I'm really here today as far as facility funding, my kid goes to Campbell County High School. You all took a tour. You've seen the facility. My kid was sent home this last year because of water problems at the school. All the other, kids were in school, but my kid was sent home. This has been an ongoing issue. I don't like going to Campbell County High School because if I have to use the restroom, I don't know if I'm going to find a working restroom in the school. That's a problem. That doesn't sound very equitable. It's not equitable. And so when we think of charter schools moving forward and the monies that it takes to build such facilities, I would only, and of course, this is a balance thing. I think most of you realize this, but it certainly would seem unfair and perhaps maybe even unjust if we had a charter school that opened up, say, in Gillette, Wyoming. We have a brand new facility that's built for that school, that's on the heels of the nice brand new facility that we have across the street over there. And then Campbell County High School seems to still get, for lack of a better term, the shaft. And so I have another student. My second oldest is going to be going to Campbell County High School. I'm going to have a senior and I'm going to have a freshman at that school. And so certainly I'm concerned as far as the equitable component. Moving forward, I don't know where that balance is. And I just throw this out there just from just a little old member of the public, right? Moving forward as far as funding for charter schools, I think that's great. I think everything that's going on, I think, is wonderful, but it should not come at the expense of existing schools. And I would definitely see that if something like that were to happen in Campbell County, I would definitely see that as coming at the expense of an existing school. Even now, being in the community, there seems, you know, you almost have this culture of the haves and have nots, you know, and when you talk about Thunder Basin across the way, wonderful school. Man, when that thing first opened, though, it was a scramble because everybody wanted to get their kid out of the old building and put them over there. And of course, there was a lot of stuff that happened in our community as a result of that. You can see a repeat of that. And so certainly taking care of our existing facilities is of utmost importance. Our school district does a fine job at educating kids, and but I don't want that to become a stumbling block or affect the morale at Campbell County High School. We got great teachers. I'm happy with the teachers that you know, educate my children, but I don't want to see that divide keep growing. And so that's my concern. That's why I came here to share this with you today. Certainly, I know it's on your minds, but sometimes it's nice to hear that from people, you know, from the public, so you don't have, you know, angry people pounding down your door. So anyway, thank you, committee, Mr. Chairman, appreciate it.
Thank you, Representative Clem. Appreciate that. Yes, Representative Storr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Clem makes a really interesting observation about the question of how charter schools do or do not displace funding for our traditional public schools. And because I'm new on the committee, I would just like to understand from the committee members how they see that philosophically breaking down, and how we are able to fund charter schools not at the expense of our traditional schools. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Clem, if you'd like to opine on that, sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I don't have a comment for that. I think that was more addressed for the committee, and that could be a discussion that you all have. I do want to raise one other point of consideration, though. And, you know, when I was in the legislature, of course, in consideration of some of the Campbell cases and whatnot, school districts have a certain amount of reserves that they're allowed to hold. And I know that there's an amount that's capped, and I'm speaking maybe out of turn. I don't know all the ins and outs, but I'm pretty sure that there's an amount of reserves that's capped. But pre a certain year, the sky's the limit. Okay. And I think there's a lot of different school districts that have a lot of different monies set aside. They don't want to spend those monies because they're kind of grandfathered into the old system. And that made me think about, you know, when you're talking about, for instance, reimbursements and being reimbursed a year later, and how do charter schools actually pay for something like that? And so I don't know the mechanism because I am so green to this conversation, but it would, you know, do charter schools have the ability to have those kind of reserves? Are you setting them up for success or failure? Are you trying to make it more of a stumbling block? Like consider, you know, the 3-year pre-existence kind of thing before you look at a building option. And I think some of those things are stumbling blocks that certainly should be remedied, but also this thing of reserves. I don't know if that's equitable. I don't know if that's something that's already been addressed within the existing legislation, but perhaps moving forward, and in light of the facilities part of it, you know, that might be something to look into as far as allowing some of these charter schools to have either the same or even maybe even greater flexibility when it comes to the amount of reserves that they hold. So, okay, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Representative Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Clem, I think it's an interesting example that you give with the problems that you face with Campbell County High. And I toured the facility. I appreciate the state in which that facility is in, but I think the example, the hypothetical that you're giving that would impact Campbell County High, building a charter school coming in and building a new facility is kind of unrealistic. If you look at the three charter schools right now that are authorized through the pilot program, they're actually they're either attempting to or taking on old facilities. The one in Mills is taking on an old elementary school. The one in Cheyenne attempted to take on a high school a junior high school that had very similar problems to Campbell High. So I guess I see it a little bit different. I see it as, you know, charter schools aren't going to come in and get a brand new facility built for them ahead of them. They're actually just trying to solve some of the capacity issues, and they're taking on these older facilities. I don't know, Mr. Chairman, I guess that's more of a, wouldn't you agree? There we go. Now that I completely disagree with your hypothetical.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, Representative Olson, and that's a point well taken. And I wasn't, you know, again, it's just a hypothetical, and certainly what you just expressed there is probably more along the lines of reality. My only point that I think is just worth emphasizing again is that whatever comes into any given community, we must be careful that it doesn't come at the expense of our existing public schools. I'm all for competition, but that competition, there should be mutual growth, in that competition should raise all ships. I guess you know, is what I'm saying. So,
Senator Rothfuss.
I think Representative Clem makes a strong point, honestly, and I don't think we should try and distract from the idea that there is a competition for these funds. As I see it, and I've served on this committee for 13 years now, Campbell County is definitely in competition for funds with charter schools. There's no question about it. We end up typically with a fixed pool of funds. We have a budget, and then we have to use that budget to the best of the ability of what the legislature prioritizes through the School Facilities Commission, coming back to this committee to determine how those funds are best appropriated. Our high schools are a challenge, right? When we have to fix a high school, it's a big challenge, and we're struggling with that. Obviously, it was better when I started on this committee, and we had billions of dollars coming, a lot of it from this here region, that took care of those big problems, but we don't have that at this point in time. So as we talk about the idea that we're not building new schools for charter schools, that's accurate. I don't think we haven't done that. We've typically used previous buildings, but those previous buildings are often buildings that we were trying to move away from, recognizing that the long-term carrying cost of that building was higher than building a new building in most instances. So the state elected to save money by closing a school down, and then we typically open that school back up, thereby carrying an expensive school in the fleet that we previously decided was too inefficient to carry, which makes it often the most expensive schools in the fleet that we're opening so that we can have charter schools. And those funds are taking away from what you're asking for. I think we need to be realistic about this. I'm a supporter of charter schools. We've got 2 in my district. I've been involved in all the legislation on charter schools, but I don't want anyone to walk away from this meeting or anyone listening to this meeting to not understand that we have a relatively fixed pie of resources that we bring to the table, and that anytime we're opening a new school, it's adding to the expense line. We have more square footage. It's more costly to operate more schools, and the more we bring online, the more costly it is for the system. It does not scale. We tend to be bringing on more expensive schools as we add charter schools, as opposed to less expensive schools, which we tend to get for carrying cost with the newer schools. So I hear what you're saying, and certainly respect what you're saying. It's a strong point. We need to be thoughtful about how many charter schools we're opening, how we're opening them, and doing it in the most cost-effective manner, because you're absolutely right. Campbell County High School needs remedy. That is a critical circumstance that we need to be looking at, and we need to take care of those students. We've had them for a long time. We value that school. It's been a staple of the state's education system for far longer than I've been involved in this. But the idea that, oh, we can do all of these things without additional funds, nothing affects the bottom line, is just inaccurate. I've been on this committee far too long to think that we can do both for free. Both are costly, both are expensive, and there are always trade-offs, Representative. So I appreciate you bringing that to our attention, and look forward to working with you and trying to balance those priorities. And it also gets at Representative Storer's question. We can't fail to acknowledge that there are costs associated with adding new schools to the fleet.
Don't you agree?
Yeah, I tried.
Okay, well, at least you admit it, so. All right, committee members, any further questions for Representative Clem? Thank you, Representative Clem, appreciate it. Committee, we're gonna go ahead and come back out of public comment again. We're gonna go back to committee directives.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Representative Olson.
I would like to make a motion that, and I don't know exactly which statute this is in, but I'm sure LSO does, that as far as costs associated with leasing a facility and the reimbursement of the funds, that we eliminate the requirement that a charter school be operating for 3 years before receiving reimbursement.
Motion by Olson, second by Senator Hicks. Everybody understand the motion? Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor of the bill draft to be drafted for our next committee meeting to eliminate the 3-year operational standard to be removed from statute, go ahead and say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. Okay, that motion passes. Any further committee directives? Any other bill drafts? Okay, seeing none, we will move on. We have about 25 minutes. And I would like to go ahead since it's a little early to break for lunch. And what I'd like to do is, as long as staff is okay with this, we're going to move into our next topic. And this is our K through 12 facility planning. And what my expectation is here is we'll move through as far as we can until the 11:30 topic. What I'm expecting is this will probably take up the majority of this will be LSO before the lunch break, and then we'll move into the department after lunch. So Mr. Hoversland and Ms. Heitrick, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the committee, Hank Hoversland, LSO. I'll be presenting item 6-01 in your packet entitled Overview of K-12 School Facilities Planning and Budgeting. This memo that I worked on with my colleagues is in response to your second priority of interim topics entitled that includes the study of the facility and planning budgeting processes utilized to construct and maintain Wyoming's K through 12 public schools. The purpose of this memorandum from LSO's viewpoint is to summarize the statutes and the requirements within statutes on the facility planning and budgeting process in light of the rules changes that occurred during the writing of this memo. There is limited references to rules, and we would defer to the department and our colleagues coming after us to answer questions on that front. So the department is required to develop long-range comprehensive facility plans for each of the 48 school districts. These plans must identify a multitude of things within them, including facility needs to align school facilities with the statewide adequacy standards. And if there are needs, they need to identify which actions they plan to take or could be taken to remedy those needs, such as construction, renovation, major maintenance expenditures, or other local enhancements. And this must be done on a building by building, space by space basis. As part of this, the department and the districts are required to prioritize to the extent possible and reasonable and practicable to prioritize non-construction alternatives such as closure of buildings, consolidation, boundary changes within their district, or grade configuration changes. If a district sees surplus facilities, buildings, or lands, they must identify their actions or plans, what they will do with those facilities. And if they identify a need for new capital construction, they must include land needed to be purchased or acquired for that, and what they will do if it's a construction project, if it'll be a new school, an addition onto a school, or a complete renovation of a school. As part of that proposal, they must indicate what grades the school will serve, the amount of students they will serve, and a timeline for that construction of the project, including when the school will open. As part of that analysis, they must also include a 5-year enrollment projection from the opening date of the school using a commission-approved approach, but this may be precise per statute, utilizing historical, economical, and social trends to make it more precise if the commission so desires. Finally, these plans must include appropriate cost estimates, how the district plans to use their major maintenance and expend that money, and finally, identify any facilities that the district plans to lease either as the lessee or the lessor. This is all contained within state statute 21-15-116A. Once these long-range comprehensive facility plans are developed by the department, the commission is required to review and approve them every 2 years. And in conducting this review, the commission is required to ensure that the plans comply with statewide adequacy standards, that they remedy the needs of the districts in the most cost-effective and efficient manner. And as part of that, including, as the statutes noted, prioritizing non-construction alternatives to the extent reasonable and practicable. And finally, that these plans provide facilities capable of supporting the statewide educational program as required by law of public schools.
Hank, I'm going to stop you for just a second. I have a question on something you said directly, and I believe it's implied, but I just want to make sure that I understand correctly, and probably for the committee's edification as well. You said that they are to meet with the school districts and approve. And so when I hear that directive, my question directly comes to what latitude does the department have in order to say no to something in a long range facility plan? What level does our statute provide to the department to say, we don't agree with this, this needs to come back out, you need to resupply this?
Mr. Chairman, I would say that the department is actually required to develop these plans, and going down onto the middle of page 2 of this memo, you will see that the districts are allowed to informally review the facility plans, remedies, and projects with the department and or the commission. And after this informal review, if the district feels aggrieved by a decision of the department or the commission, they may seek review under the Wyoming Administrative Procedures Act. I would also defer to my colleague, Ms. Hytrack, if she has anything else to add.
Mr. Chairman, the only addition I would say in direct response to your question, it is the obligation of the state construction department and the commission to approve these plans. And so in the event that they disagree with the district on their proposed new facilities or renovation or major maintenance expenditures, it's incumbent upon them under the statutes to make those changes to the facility plans. And in the event the district disagrees, as my colleague pointed out, there's a process both for an informal review and then also review through a contested case proceeding.
Yes, Senator Landon.
So, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Ms. Hytrack, Mr. Hubbard, is there any conflicting statutes with regard to districts' responsibilities? And that just came to my mind when you expounded a little bit. I guess I would wonder if we have that sort of conflict, what trumps the other?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, I'm not aware of statutes that exist that are conflicting with regard to the long range facility plans and whose obligations or responsibilities fall to whom. One question that was posed to me over the break is sort of the entry of the schools. And I guess that's not a statutory confliction. There's no mandatory obligation that the state construction department have access to school buildings, but it's implied in the fact that they're going to be presenting these long range facility plans. But we could certainly follow up and do some additional research and get back to you in the event that there are conflicting, or if the school districts they deal with these statutes every day. It's possible the school districts or the state construction department have identified that, but no one has identified that to me.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just trying to understand what the process looks like on the ground. So the state construction department is developing a long-range comprehensive plan for each district, but do districts independently develop strategic plans? Or when I hear of that, am I hearing that it's the plan they developed with state construction, or what does that look like?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Olson, I can't speak to the current practice. Those rules are in a relative state of flux. And I know the administration currently at the state construction department, to my knowledge, hasn't undertaken the annual long range facility planning process. But previously, those were actually conducted annually for a period of time. And it was a very cooperative, collaborative process. The districts sort of inputted information with the project manager, which is assigned to their school district, along with other officials at the state construction department that work solely on the long range facility plans. And then they would have a long meeting that's recorded, and actually they're available on the state construction department's website if anyone's interested. Natrona County, Laramie County, it was a full day meeting. And they went through every building, you know, every construction request. It's very laborious and detail oriented. But I would pose that question to the state construction department.
I was
with
just going
regard
to say,
the-
we'll probably look into that, and I see the director shaking his head. So any further questions up to this point? Seeing none, Hank, go ahead. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just finishing up on the facility plans, I would note that according to the Commission's 2022 annual report, the department aims to have these meetings and plans done by April before a budget session. So that would have been a couple of months ago, but I know further on in this presentation, there's talk about the facility condition assessment that's being completed this year. And so that may be part of why they have not been approved by the commission quite yet. As noted, the commission is required to adopt policies, guidelines, and standards for assessing school buildings and facilities to evaluate the adequacy of these the school buildings and facilities and the adequacy standards that the commission sets out in their Chapter 3 rules. In this annual assessment, the commission must give due consideration to the school district facility plans that are approved every 2 years. And this evaluation helps the commission to prioritize needs and remedies for those needs in 2 schedules required by statute: a condition needs schedule and a capacity needs schedule. These schedules are to prioritize school buildings and facilities that impede the statewide educational program. And the intent of them is to ensure that they're over a long range of time that all school buildings and facilities statewide come into compliance with the commission's statewide adequacy standards. The first schedule, the condition schedule, is required to be developed using appropriate criteria and measures for building condition as established by commission rule. And the department and the commission, as noted earlier, are in the final stages of a facility condition assessment. Recall in the 2022 budget session, the legislature appropriated $4 million to the department to contract for these services. And I think you will get an update from the department later this afternoon on that. The last facility condition assessment was completed in 2016 and is what guided the condition schedule ever since. So this updated one will inform the new condition schedule, although I would note that the condition schedule is updated annually.
Hank, real quick, and maybe Tanya for this, based off of that, it is statutorily required that this is done every 2 years. Is that correct? However, the appropriation did not make it through in the 2020 session, and that's why we did not have an updated FCA. Is that, or an FCI index?
Mr. Chairman, the annual facility long-range comprehensive plans are required every 2 years.
Okay.
The condition needs index is required to be updated and presented to you annually.
Okay.
But the assessment that informs that is actually not statutorily directed on in a time interval basis. The statewide adequacy standards are required to be looked at every 4 years. And so I think there is sort of this notion or belief that the condition needs assessment of the school building statewide needs to take place every 4 years to align with that. And so I think that's what you're referring to sort of this year delay. You'll recall there was discussion about that appropriation prior to the actual appropriation of the $4 million, but just couldn't get it through both houses. But there was a line item in that budget bill the year prior for this work. But there were some questions about educational suitability and whether that should be assessed. And as a result, the legislature took that out of the statute. And so just from a timing perspective, it didn't make sense to assess it at that time. So
Thank you.
hence in 2022, the $4 million that my colleague spoke of.
Thank you. I appreciate the clarification. Go ahead, Tink.
The second condition need schedule is the capacity schedule, and this is based on an analysis of student enrollment changes and is calculated on a commission approved enrollment projection methodology pursuant to their rules. This is done to determine the need for changes in building capacity in order to bring these school buildings and facilities again in compliance with the statewide adequacy standards over a 5-year period. As you may recall, and as Ms. Hytrek talked about earlier this morning, there used to be a third remediation schedule, which was the consolidated remediation schedule. This was brought into statute in 2021, but repealed in this past session, and that the repeal of that becomes effective July 1st. So that is no longer required of the commission to be developed. When a remedy is identified to address either a condition or a capacity need, the commission must ensure 3 things. First, that the remedy is the most cost-effective remedy and efficient remedy to deliver educational services. 2, to make sure that the remedy brings the building or facility within compliance with the statewide adequacy standards. And then finally, that it is in the best financial interests of the state. Any analysis on this requirement may include the consideration of consolidating educational facilities within, between, or among school districts. And that kind of goes back to the idea of prioritizing non-construction alternatives. As we've mentioned, Ms. Hytrek mentioned, the statewide adequacy standards are promulgated in the commission's Chapter 3 rules and are required to be reviewed and evaluated every 4 years. The statutes prescribe that these adequacy standards must include requirements for educating students in a safe environment. They must include building site requirements, building performance standards, assurances that students with special needs or disabilities have access to these buildings, standards for educational space to allow the delivery of the statewide educational program, include capacity criteria for the building to align with the statewide educational program, and consideration is given to different school levels and school sizes. And finally, technology capacity criteria sufficient to meet the statewide education technology plan. Once all of this is completed, the annual budgeting process, all of this really helps to inform the annual budgeting process. So the way the budgeting process works is that the commission approves a budget and forwards it to the select committee and the governor, and this must be done annually by September 1st. Included in that budget is appropriations for capital construction projects, the major maintenance required payments to districts required by statute, inflationary costs, unanticipated costs, offsite infrastructure costs, and any other costs the commission deems necessary. And also included in the budget forwarded to you all and the governor is the capacity and condition need schedules and then the annual building status report. Mentioned earlier this morning was the bill session laws chapter 15, which allowed for the legislature, or clarified that the legislature can appropriate for projects on in a single lump sum for all phases of a project. That can be planning, construction, design, demolition if needed. That doesn't change the requirement, as noted earlier this morning, that the commission send forward the budget with appropriations for each line item. Rather, and also the department may transfer up to 15% of the total funds appropriated between project phases. This must be reported to the select committee and approved by the governor. So I think that's important to mention. Once the select committee receives this by September 1st, they're statutorily required to forward their budget recommendation to the governor and the Joint Appropriations Committee by November 1st annually. And following that, the normal appropriations process occurs with the governor's recommendations, the Joint Appropriations Committee hearings, and then review by the entire legislature. One final note on the $100 million appropriation, the supplemental appropriation in this past budget bill, the $5 million that was bifurcated into the $5 million for planning and most cost-effective remedy studies, and then $95 million for capital for projects for school buildings and facilities. I would note that all the statutory requirements discussed earlier are required but on top of that, any projects to qualify for the $95 million appropriation must be included within the district's facility plan, must be the most cost-effective and efficient remedy, and if those two requirements are met, as well as the statutory requirements, the state construction department must approve or conduct the planning and design for these projects. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'd stand for any questions.
So committee, this was kind of, I will say, school facilities 101 is probably the easiest way to put this out. So for those of us that have sat on the committee for a year, any more than a year, this is a little bit of regurgitation, but for those who are brand new to the committee, I would encourage that if you have any questions about the process and how things move forward, this is certainly the time to ask your staff if you have questions on this. And there's no such thing as an out of line question at this point. So if you have questions, please let's go ahead and ask our staff as we move forward. We'll open it up for the committee's discussion at this point. So anybody, Senator Hicks?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I may not be for staff, but for the construction division, but where are we at with the school facilities assessment? Because it's predicated that has to be done before, which means the commission has to certify that before any of that $100 million could be spent. So, and maybe staff has the answer to that. Where are we at in that process?
I think it's probably, I'll rephrase that question. So for staff, and then we will hear from the department after lunch. We'll have them answer that question directly, but maybe if staff can determine or
Mr. Chairman, we can wait if we're going to get enough.
Well, I think it's a good question. I think go ahead and explain the process of how that goes into what we will hear in the next meeting and how that will be played out this afternoon as well.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hicks, thank you for bringing that up. I did forget to mention that this $100 million that the legislature appropriated last session cannot be spent until the chairman of the commission in writing to the governor certifies that the facility condition assessment is completed. Chairman Brown, and you make a good point that that's a better question for the department on where that process is, and that's an upcoming agenda item. But the $100 million cannot be, none of it can be spent by the department, the commission, until the facility condition assessment is completed.
Just out of clarification, this might even be for my good vice chairman here, that or anybody else who's been a part of this committee for an extended amount of time. When do we typically get that information back from the department as certified? Has it been kind of all over the place? Do we typically receive it in the middle of right before we come into our next meeting? What's that kind of look like?
Mr. Chairman, I think probably Representative Harshman and Vice Chairman Landon can answer that. I don't remember in 2016, what point that was presented to the committee. I know certainly by September 1st, when the budget recommendation was made, the long range facility planning had taken place, and they had a prioritized list of projects that they had recommended, but I would punt to those two.
So I will ask directly to the two longest or maybe three longest serving members, maybe Senator Rothfuss as well. You guys remember when we received that information as kind of a filed in 100% certified document?
My sense, Mr. Chairman, is that usually by about now, we are provided, with the information that the assessment's been completed. And then as we go through August, obviously preparations by the commission and then by us by September 1st, a good notion of what we're going to recommend on a budget. So that's my recollection, and maybe Senator Rothfuss is shaking his head yes. So yeah, this is about the time that we try to get completed. I think we might be running a little bit behind this year, but
Representative Harshman, any deviation there?
Feeling memory. So I always thought it was a little bit later, frankly. I thought more towards our, later in the summer, but yeah.
Okay. And nothing more again for edification as a new chairman on this. I've only been here for a couple of years, so this is the first time I've had this come through. So I do appreciate the history and the knowledge of what's occurred in the past, but.
And Mr. Chairman, I would note the restrictions in the budget bill in section 313, those are a bit unique. So you wouldn't have followed the same process in 2016. I don't believe the same language was utilized with $100 million sort of set aside to be further appropriated.
That's fair as well.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's a very good point. We had to clear the budget session before that 5 million set aside. So that by no means is intended to cast a shadow in any direction. I think about this time of year, though, we're made aware, and then we move into the budget process, commission and the select.
Okay. All right. Hank, anything further? Tanya, anything further?
Mr. Chairman, in response to your question, in 2016, the facility condition assessment report was provided by September 1st to the committee for presentation at its September meeting. So I think it was kind of aligned more so with the budgeting, that budget timeline.
Okay, perfect. And that was kind of a piggyback for Senator Hicks too, because that's new information for me as well. So thank you for that. And I think Matt may have provided that information. So thanks, Matt, for digging into that. So, all right, committee, any further questions for staff at this point? Yes, Representative Storr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my understanding is these changes provide a much larger role for the department to play in the planning and design of schools and districts. Is that a fair assessment?
I think, Hank, I'll let you answer that if you'd like. I think you're talking about the rules themselves. Is
Yeah.
that right? So we're not into the rules discussion quite
Not
yet. This is strictly the planning and the budgeting process. We will dive into rules after lunch. And frankly, I think we've got plenty of people in the audience that are willing to educate us on the rules process of now and prior years as well. So with that committee, it is 11:30. We are a little ahead of schedule, but I want to keep us a little ahead of schedule if possible. So we are only going to take an hour for lunch. I know I'm going to get some groans out of that, but we'll be back here at 12:35 to start the rest of our afternoon. We are in recess.